In this video, we're breaking down and debunking Vecna's entire ultimate plan within 2 hours. Let's get into it. First up, we got the birth of a monster, Henry Creel's origins, and the 1959 Creel House murders. Henry Creel was born in 1947 in Rachel, Nevada, to parents Victor and Virginia Creel. He had an older sister named Alice who was older than him by a few years. From a very young age, Henry was different from other children. He felt separated from the world around him and struggled to connect with his family or anyone else. Other kids at school thought he was strange and treated him like an outcast. Teachers did not understand him either. Henry felt broken and misunderstood, like he did not belong anywhere in normal society. What made Henry truly different, though, was not just his personality. He was born with real psychic powers that set him apart from every other human being on the planet. Victor Creel was a World War II veteran who had served in France during the war. During his time as a soldier, Victor was ordered to shell a house that he later discovered had innocent people inside. He remembered seeing a baby's cradle catch fire because of his actions. This memory haunted Victor for the rest of his life, filling him with guilt and regret. After the war ended, Victor came home and married Virginia. They started a family together and tried to build a normal, happy life. For years, they lived quietly, raising their 2 children and trying to move past the horrors of war. Victor hoped that by creating a peaceful family, he could leave his dark memories behind. In 1959, everything changed for the Creel family when Virginia's great-uncle passed away. The uncle left them a small fortune in his will, enough money to buy a beautiful new house and start fresh somewhere else. The family decided to move to Hawkins, Indiana, a small town that seemed perfect for raising children. They purchased a large house on Moorhead Street in the spring of that year. The house was gorgeous, with stained glass windows and plenty of space for the whole family. Victor was excited about the move. He thought a new home in a new town would help the family, especially Henry, who had always struggled to fit in. Henry, however, was not happy about moving to Hawkins. He felt pessimistic about the change and did not believe a new house would fix anything. When the Creel family first arrived at their new home in Hawkins, things seemed fine at first. The house was beautiful and had everything they needed. But Henry quickly found something in the house that fascinated him more than anything else. In the attic and inside the vents, Henry discovered a nest of black widow spiders. These spiders were not just interesting to Henry, he found them absolutely captivating. He would spend hours watching them, studying how they moved and how they hunted. To Henry, black widows were the ultimate predators. They were small, and people looked down on them because of their size, but they were incredibly deadly and efficient killers. Henry saw himself in these spiders. He felt like people underestimated him too, just like they underestimated the spiders. The black widows became Henry's only real connection in the house. He felt more empathy toward these creatures than he ever felt toward any human being. The cold attic became Henry's favorite place in the house. He would retreat there to be alone with the spiders and to practice something that was beginning to emerge inside him. Henry's psychic powers were growing stronger. He had several different abilities that were developing at the same time. He had telepathy, which meant he could read other people's thoughts and see inside their minds. He had telekinesis, which allowed him to move objects with his mind. He could create illusions that made people see things that were not really there. He could even manipulate time in small ways. These powers were natural to Henry. He was not created in the lab or given these abilities through experiments. He was simply born this way, which made him completely unique. As Henry spent more time in the house, he practiced using these powers more and more. He was teaching himself what he could do and how far his abilities could go. Henry began using his powers around the house and the surrounding area. Dead animals started appearing near the Creel home. Small creatures like birds and rabbits would show up twisted and broken, killed by Henry's telekinetic powers. He was experimenting, learning how to tear things apart with his mind. Victor noticed the dead animals and thought maybe a wildcat was attacking creatures in the area. He had no idea his own son was responsible. Henry also started manipulating the electricity in the house. Lights would flicker on and off at strange times for no reason. The family could not explain why this kept happening. Everything seemed normal about the house, but these strange events kept occurring. Then, Henry started doing something even worse. He began using his telepathic powers to reach inside his family's minds. He could see their thoughts, their memories, their deepest fears, and worst moments. What Henry saw inside his family's heads disgusted him. He looked into his father's mind and saw Victor's guilt about the war and the baby who died. He looked into his mother's thoughts and his sister's thoughts. Everywhere he looked, Henry saw what he believed was weakness and lies. He saw people pretending to be happy when they were not. He saw his parents going through the motions of family life without really meaning it. Henry came to believe that all of human society was fake and broken. He thought people were just mindless creatures following rules that did not matter, pretending to care about each other when they really did not. Henry decided he did not want to be part of this broken world. He began showing his family members horrifying visions. Using his powers, he would trap them in waking nightmares. Victor would suddenly see the burning cradle from France again, watching the baby die over and over. The vision felt completely real, with Victor unable to escape the memory no matter how hard he tried. Alice and Virginia had their own nightmares too, seeing terrible things that Henry pulled from their minds and made real through his illusions. The family did not understand what was happening to them. They thought something was wrong with the house itself. Victor became convinced that a demon was possessing their home. He believed an evil spirit was tormenting them. He even brought in a priest to bless the house and try to drive the demon away. But of course, this did not work. There was no demon. There was only Henry. Virginia Creel was the only person who started to suspect the truth. As a mother, she sensed that something was wrong with her son. She noticed patterns in when the strange events happened. She saw how Henry acted and began to piece together that he might be behind everything. Virginia was terrified of her own child, but she did not know what to do. She made a decision that would seal the family's fate. She reached out to a scientist named Dr. Martin Brenner. Virginia had heard that Dr. Brenner worked with unusual cases and might be able to help with Henry's condition. She wanted Brenner to take Henry away and fix whatever was wrong with him. She did not realize that Brenner was involved in secret government experiments and would see Henry as the perfect test subject. When Henry found out that his mother had contacted Dr. Brenner, he was furious. He felt betrayed. Henry already believed that humans were broken and that society was meaningless. Now his own mother wanted to send him away, to have someone try to fix him like he was a broken toy. Henry did not think he was the one who was broken. He thought everyone else was broken, and he was the only one who could see the truth. His anger at his mother and his disgust with his family reached a breaking point. Henry decided that his family needed to die. He would use his powers to kill them and show everyone what he was truly capable of. One evening, the Creel family sat down together for dinner. It seemed like a normal family meal at first. Victor, Virginia, Alice, and Henry were all at the table, but Henry had made his decision. As they ate, Henry activated his powers with full force. Virginia suddenly lifted off her chair and floated into the air. Her body began to twist in horrible ways. Her bones started breaking, snapping one by one as Henry used his telekinesis to crush her from the inside out. Her eyes were pushed back into her skull. Virginia died in agony while the rest of the family watched in horror. Alice was next. Henry used the same terrible power on his sister, lifting her into the air and breaking her body apart. She died the same gruesome death as their mother. Victor was supposed to die too. Henry was reaching into his father's mind, preparing to kill him the same way he killed Virginia and Alice. But something unexpected happened. A song started playing on the radio. Victor heard the music and his mind latched onto it. He later described the music as sounding like the voice of an angel. The song pulled Victor out of the nightmare vision Henry was creating. It broke the connection between Henry's mind and Victor's mind just enough to save Victor's life. Henry could not complete the murder. At the same moment, Henry himself collapsed. He was only a child, and he did not fully understand the limits of his own powers. Killing two people at once and trying to kill a third person was too much for him. He had overexerted himself, pushing his abilities too far. Henry fell into a deep coma right there at the dinner table. When authorities arrived at the Creel house, they found a horrifying scene. Virginia and Alice were dead, their bodies broken in ways that seemed impossible. Victor was traumatized and confused, barely able to explain what had happened. Henry was unconscious and unresponsive. The police and everyone else who investigated could not figure out what really happened. The method of death was bizarre and did not match any normal type of murder, but someone had to be blamed for these deaths. Victor was the obvious suspect. He was the father and husband, and in cases of family violence, the father is usually the one responsible. Victor tried to explain about the demon and the visions, but this only made him seem insane. No one believed his story about a supernatural force in the house. Victor was arrested and charged with murdering his wife and daughter. Victor took a plea deal rather than go to trial. He was sent to Pennhurst Mental Hospital in Curley County, Indiana, where he would spend the rest of his life. Victor truly believed he was innocent and that a demon had killed his family. He thought the demon had left him alive as punishment, forcing him to live with the guilt and memory of what happened. The trauma was so severe that Victor eventually used a razor to blind himself, permanently damaging his eyes in a suicide attempt that failed. He wanted to die but survived, spending decades locked away in the psychiatric hospital. The people of Hawkins remembered Victor Creel as a monster. He became a local boogeyman, a story that parents told to scare children. Everyone in Wayne Munson's generation knew the name Victor Creel and the terrible murders at the house on Moorhead Street. The house itself was abandoned after the murders. No one wanted to live there. It remained empty for decades, becoming a creepy landmark that Hawkins residents avoided. But what happened to Henry? While Victor was sent to the mental hospital, Henry was taken somewhere else entirely. When Henry woke up from his coma, he found himself in the care of Dr. Martin Brenner. The scientist had gotten exactly what he wanted. Virginia had contacted Brenner before she died, telling him about her son's unusual abilities. After the murders, Brenner swooped in and took custody of Henry. Brenner was involved in a secret CIA project called MK-Ultra, which focused on creating superhuman assets for the Cold War. The government wanted people with special powers who could be used as weapons or spies. Henry, with his incredible natural abilities, was the perfect subject for Brenner's experiments. Dr. Brenner figured out how to control Henry. He implanted a chip in Henry's neck that suppressed his powers and kept him restrained. With the chip in place, Henry could not use his abilities to escape or hurt anyone. Henry became known as Number 1. He was the first test subject in Brenner's program at Hawkins National Laboratory. Brenner studied Henry for years, trying to understand how his powers worked. The scientist ran countless tests and experiments on the boy. Brenner wanted to recreate Henry's abilities in other people. Since Henry was beyond his control even with the chip, Brenner's goal became to make more children with powers like Henry's, but children who could actually be controlled and used by the government. Henry spent years at Hawkins' lab as Number 1. As he got older, Brenner had him work as an orderly in the facility. Henry wore a white uniform and helped take care of the other test subjects. By this time, Brenner had succeeded in giving powers to other children through experiments. There were 17 numbered children in total at the lab, ranging from Number 2 through Number 17. The most powerful of these children, besides Henry, was a young girl named 11. Henry watched these children grow up in the lab, being experimented on and trained just like he had been. On the outside, Henry played the role of a friendly orderly. He pretended to be kind and helpful, but inside, he was still the same person who had murdered his mother and sister. He still believed that humanity was broken and needed to be destroyed. Henry saw something special in 11. She was different from the other children. She had real power, almost as much as Henry himself. He watched as the other children bullied 11 and treated her badly. Henry decided to befriend her. He helped 11 develop her powers, teaching her techniques and encouraging her. But Henry had an ulterior motive. He was not helping 11 out of kindness. He was grooming her to help him escape from the lab. Henry believed that he and 11 were alike, that they were both superior to normal humans. He thought 11 would understand his worldview and join him in his mission to destroy human society. The relationship between Henry and 11 would eventually lead to one of the most important moments in the entire story of Hawkins and the Upside Down. Henry's time as Number 1 was preparing him for something much bigger. His hatred of humanity was growing stronger every day he spent in the lab. His philosophy was becoming more extreme. He believed that the world needed to be remade, that humans needed to be wiped out so something better could take their place. The murders of his mother and sister in 1959 were just the beginning. Henry Creel had much bigger plans for the future. He was waiting for the right moment to make his move, to break free from Dr. Brenner's control and begin his real mission. That moment would come in 1979, 20 years after he killed his family, when everything would change forever, and Henry would become something far more monstrous than the boy who murdered his family at the dinner table in Hawkins. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Becoming One, Henry's transformation at Hawkins' lab, under Dr. Brenner. When Henry Creel woke up from his coma after murdering his mother and sister, his life changed completely. He was no longer in his family home. He was no longer free. Instead, he found himself in the hands of Dr. Martin Brenner, the scientist his mother had contacted before her death. While Victor Creel was locked away in Penhurst Mental Hospital, taking the blame for murders he did not commit, Henry became something else entirely. He became Number 1, the very first test subject in a secret government program that would eventually create 11 and change the fate of Hawkins forever. This transformation from Henry Creel into Number 1 was a crucial part of the path that would lead him to become Vecna, the monster who would nearly destroy the world. Dr. Martin Brenner was not a normal doctor. He worked for the United States government on classified projects that ordinary citizens knew nothing about. Brenner was involved in something called Project MK-Ultra, a real CIA program that experimented on people to try to create superhuman abilities. The government wanted weapons for the Cold War against the Soviet Union. They wanted spies who could read minds, soldiers who could kill with their thoughts, and agents who could do impossible things. When Brenner learned about Henry Creel and his natural psychic powers, he saw the opportunity of a lifetime. Here was a boy who could already do everything the government wanted. Henry had telepathy, telekinesis, and other abilities that Brenner had been trying to create artificially for years. Henry was proof that these powers were real and possible. After the murders at the Creel house, Brenner took custody of Henry. We do not know exactly how this happened or what legal arrangements were made. What we do know is that Henry disappeared from public record. While everyone in Hawkins believed Victor's son had died from his injuries, Henry was actually alive and in Brenner's control. Brenner brought Henry to Hawkins National Laboratory, a facility that looked ordinary on the outside, but hid terrible secrets inside. The lab became Henry's new prison, but it was also the place where Brenner would study him and try to unlock the secrets of his powers. Brenner quickly realized that Henry was dangerous. The boy had murdered 2 people with his abilities and had tried to kill a third. Henry's powers were incredibly strong, possibly stronger than anything Brenner had ever seen. Brenner knew he needed to control Henry before he could study him properly. The solution was a small device implanted in Henry's neck. This inhibitor chip was designed to suppress Henry's powers and keep them locked away. With the chip in place, Henry could not use his telepathy to read minds, or his telekinesis to hurt people. He was essentially a normal human, trapped in his own body with his abilities sealed off. The chip kept Henry restrained and harmless, at least on the surface. He could not escape, and he could not fight back as long as the chip remained in his neck. Henry became known as Number 1. He was not called by his real name anymore inside the lab. He was the first subject in Brenner's program, the original test case for everything that would come after. Brenner ran countless experiments on Henry over the years. He studied Henry's brain patterns, his blood, his physical responses. Brenner wanted to understand how Henry's powers worked at a fundamental level. The goal was not just to study Henry, but to recreate what made him special. If Brenner could figure out how Henry's abilities functioned, he could give those same powers to other people. He could create an army of psychic soldiers for the government. For years, Henry lived as Number 1 in the laboratory. He was a prisoner, but he was also a survivor. Henry learned to adapt to his situation. He could not fight Brenner directly because of the inhibitor chip, so he had to be patient. He had to wait and watch for an opportunity. Brenner decided at some point to give Henry a job within the facility. Henry became an orderly, one of the white uniformed staff members who worked at the lab. He helped with daily tasks, assisted with the other test subjects, and made himself useful. On the outside, Henry seemed like a gentle and kind person. He spoke softly and acted friendly. He seemed harmless and helpful, but this was all an act. Inside, Henry was still the same boy who had murdered his family. His hatred for humanity had not gone away. If anything, years of being imprisoned and experimented on had made his feelings even stronger. While Henry was Number 1, Dr. Brenner was working on his real goal. Brenner wanted to create more children with powers like Henry's. Since he could not control Henry himself, Brenner needed new subjects who would be more obedient. Brenner began experimenting on other people, trying to give them psychic abilities artificially. We do not know all the details of how Brenner did this, but we know he succeeded. Over time, Brenner created more numbered children. There was Number 2, Number 3, and so on, all the way up to Number 17. These children were taken or born into the program and raised in the laboratory. They never knew normal life. The lab was all they had ever known. Each of these numbered children had powers, though not all of them were as strong as Henry. They could move objects with their minds, sense things from far away, and perform other psychic feats. Brenner trained these children like soldiers. He put them through exercises and tests to develop their abilities. He wanted them to be useful to the government when they grew up. The children lived in rooms at the lab and wore identical clothing. They were identified by numbers tattooed on their wrists. Their lives were completely controlled by Brenner and his staff. They had no freedom and no choice about what happened to them. Henry, as Number 1, was put in charge of overseeing these children. Even though his own powers were suppressed by the chip, Henry had experience with abilities that the other children were just learning to use. Brenner had Henry watch the children during their activities and training sessions. Henry was supposed to report back to Brenner about their progress. He was meant to be a supervisor and a caretaker. The children saw Henry as an orderly, just another staff member at the lab. They did not know he was actually number one. They did not know he had powers that were hidden away. Henry played his role perfectly, pretending to be a normal person who worked for Dr. Brenner. But Henry was always watching and waiting. He was looking for someone special among all these numbered children. He was searching for someone powerful enough to help him escape. Most of the children were not strong enough for what Henry had in mind. Then he noticed one particular girl who stood out from all the rest. This girl was number 11. She was younger than Henry, but she had incredible potential. 11's powers were stronger than any of the other children. Brenner paid special attention to 11, pushing her harder than the others, expecting more from her. Henry saw that 11 was different. He saw that she might be the key to his freedom. Henry decided to befriend 11. He started paying attention to her, speaking to her kindly when no one else would. 11 was struggling at the lab. The other numbered children bullied her constantly. They thought she was weak and made fun of her. 11 could not perform as well as Brenner wanted during training exercises. She was frustrated and scared most of the time. Henry saw that 11 was isolated and vulnerable. He used this to get close to her. Henry began helping 11 with her powers. He would find moments when they were alone and give her advice. He taught her techniques for focusing her mind and accessing her abilities. He encouraged her when she felt like giving up. 11 started to trust Henry. She saw him as the only kind person in the entire laboratory. Henry was gentle with her when everyone else was cruel. He seemed to understand her when no one else did. 11 did not realize that Henry was manipulating her. She did not know that Henry had his own agenda. Henry was not helping 11 because he cared about her well-being. He was helping her because he needed her. Henry had a plan forming in his mind. He wanted to escape from the laboratory and from Dr. Brenner's control. To do that, he needed someone to remove the inhibitor chip from his neck. The chip could not be removed by normal means. It required telekinetic power to take it out. Henry needed 11 to get strong enough to remove the chip, and then he needed her to trust him enough to actually do it. While Henry was befriending 11 and working as an orderly, his philosophy about life was growing darker and more extreme. Henry had always believed that humans were broken, ever since he was a child in the Creel house. Years of imprisonment had only strengthened this belief. Henry looked at Dr. Brenner and the other scientists and saw exactly what he hated about humanity. He saw people who pretended to care about the children while actually using them as test subjects. He saw lies and fake kindness everywhere. Brenner would act like a father figure to the children, calling himself Papa, but he was really just using them for government experiments. The other staff members went along with this, pretending everything was normal when they were actually participating in child abuse. Henry came to believe that all of human civilization was built on lies like this. He thought people were weak creatures who followed meaningless rules and pretended to have emotions they did not really feel. Henry saw himself as different from normal humans. He believed he was a predator, something superior to regular people. Just like the Black Widow spiders he had loved as a child, Henry thought he was underestimated and misunderstood. People looked down on him, but he was actually the most powerful person in the room. Henry developed a worldview that humans needed to be eliminated. He believed the world would be better without humanity in it. He saw himself as someone who could reshape reality and create something new, something better than the broken society that existed. This nihilistic philosophy was at the core of everything Henry would eventually become as Vecna. His hatred for humanity was not just anger about his own imprisonment. It was a deep belief that people themselves were the problem. Henry thought he could see truth that others could not see. He believed normal humans were like actors in a play, going through motions without understanding how meaningless everything was. Henry wanted to tear down this play and end the performance forever. He saw himself as a force of nature, a necessary predator who would cleanse the world of human weakness. Henry kept these beliefs hidden while he worked at the lab. He continued playing the role of the friendly orderly. He smiled at the children and helped with daily tasks. He reported to Dr. Brenner like a loyal assistant, but inside, Henry was planning something terrible. He was waiting for the perfect moment to reveal his true self. He was preparing for the day when he could break free and begin his real mission. That day came on September 8, 1979, a date that would change everything. By 1979, 11 had grown stronger with Henry's help. She was becoming more powerful than any of the other children. Henry decided it was time to make his move. He approached 11 and told her he wanted to help her escape from the lab. He made her believe that they were both prisoners of Dr. Brenner and that they needed to get away together. 11 trusted Henry completely by this point. She saw him as her only friend in the world. Henry gave 11 a key card that would let her access restricted areas of the facility. He told her to go to a specific room in the basement and wait for him there. 11 did exactly what Henry asked. She used the key card to reach the basement room. When Henry arrived, he explained that he could not leave the facility because of something in his neck. He showed 11 the inhibitor chip. Henry asked 11 to use her powers to remove the chip. 11 focused her telekinetic abilities on the small device and pulled it out of Henry's neck. The moment the chip was removed, Henry's powers came flooding back. After years of being suppressed and locked away, Henry could finally use his abilities again. He could read minds and move objects and do all the things he had been prevented from doing since he was a child. Guards discovered 11 in the restricted area and came to stop her. Henry told 11 to wait in a closet and stay hidden. Then Henry walked out to face the guards. What happened next was a massacre. Henry used his restored powers to kill the guards instantly. He crushed their bodies with his mind, breaking their bones and destroying them in seconds. But Henry did not stop with the guards. He walked through the hallways of Hawkins' laboratory and began killing everyone he found. Scientists, staff members, and most horrifyingly, the other numbered children. Henry murdered them all. The children were in a rainbow room, a colorful play area where they spent time together. Henry entered the room and the children did not understand what was happening at first. Then Henry activated his powers. One by one, the numbered children died. Their bodies lifted into the air and their bones broke. Their eyes were pushed into their skulls. It was the same death that Henry had given his mother and sister years ago at the Creel house. Number 2, number 3, all the way through the numbered children died in agony. Henry showed no mercy and no hesitation. These children had done nothing to him, but Henry did not care. They were part of the system he hated. They represented everything he wanted to destroy. Dr. Brenner was in the rainbow room when the massacre began. Henry attacked Brenner but did not kill him. We do not know exactly why Henry let Brenner live. Perhaps he wanted Brenner to suffer by watching everyone die. Perhaps Henry's powers were getting tired from killing so many people. Whatever the reason, Brenner survived the attack, though he was badly injured and bleeding. 11 eventually came out of the closet where she had been hiding. She walked through the laboratory and saw dead bodies everywhere. The hallways were covered in blood. She reached the rainbow room and found all the other numbered children dead. Then she saw Henry standing there. Henry was covered in blood, but he looked calm. He had been waiting for 11 to find him. This was the moment when Henry revealed his true self to the girl who had trusted him. Henry explained everything to 11. He told her about his childhood in the Creel house. He told her about killing his mother and sister. He explained his philosophy about humanity being broken and weak. Henry said that society was a cage and that normal people were mindless actors following meaningless rules. He told 11 that she and he were different from ordinary humans. They were superior beings, predators who were better than their prey. Henry said they did not have to pretend to be part of human society. They could be free and do whatever they wanted. Henry offered 11 a choice. He asked her to join him. He wanted 11 to come with him and help reshape the world. Henry believed that together, they could eliminate humanity and create something new. He thought 11 would understand his vision and agree with him. He had spent so much time grooming her and befriending her that he truly believed she would see things his way. Henry saw 11 as someone like himself, someone who had been hurt by humans and who would want revenge. But Henry was wrong about 11. She did not agree with his philosophy at all. 11 was horrified by what Henry had done. She looked at the dead children, kids she had grown up with, and she was devastated. These were not mindless actors to 11. They were real people with real lives. 11 rejected everything Henry said. She refused his offer to join him. This made Henry angry. He could not understand why 11 would choose to stay loyal to humanity after everything Dr. Brenner and the lab had done to her. In Henry's mind, 11 was making the wrong choice, siding with weakness instead of embracing her true power. Henry and 11 faced each other in the rainbow room. They were about to have a battle that would change the course of history. Henry believed he was stronger than 11 and that he could force her to see things his way. 11 knew she had to stop Henry no matter what. She reached into her memories and thought about her mother, about the one moment of pure love she had experienced when she was born. That memory gave 11 strength. The two of them engaged in a psychic battle, using their powers against each other. The room shook, and objects flew through the air as their minds collided. 11 proved to be stronger than Henry expected. She overpowered him, using every bit of strength she had. 11 used her abilities to push Henry backward. A portal opened in the wall of the rainbow room, a crack in reality that led to another dimension. 11 pushed Henry through this portal with her mind, banishing him from Earth entirely. Henry was sent tumbling through a dark space filled with strange lights. He crashed into a dimension that was completely alien, a place with floating rocks and a dark red sky. This dimension would eventually be called the Upside Down, but at this moment, it was something else. It was Dimension X, an empty wasteland untouched by human life. As Henry fell through this dimension, the environment attacked him. Strange lightning bolts struck his body over and over. The atmosphere was toxic and burned his skin. Henry's human appearance was destroyed. His flesh was charred and melted. His body was mutilated beyond recognition. The transformation was agonizing. Henry Creel, who had once been a normal-looking boy, became something monstrous. His journey from Henry to number 1 was complete. Now he was becoming something else entirely. He was becoming Vecna, though he would not be called that name for many more years. The boy who had killed his family, the test subject who had massacred the laboratory, was now a monster in another dimension, and his mission to destroy humanity was just beginning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Banishment. 11 versus 1 and the creation of Vecna. September 8, 1979 was the day that changed everything. This was the day when Henry Creel, also known as Number 1, would reveal his true identity to 11 and attempt to recruit her for his mission to destroy humanity. This was the day when the worst massacre in Hawkins' laboratory history would occur, with nearly everyone in the facility killed in a matter of minutes. Most importantly, this was the day when Henry would be banished to another dimension and transformed into the creature that would eventually be called Vecna. Everything that happened on this single day set in motion the events that would plague Hawkins for years to come. Without September 8, 1979, there would be no Upside Down as we know it, no Mind Flayer, and no threat to the world that 11 and her friends would spend years fighting against. The day began with Henry putting his escape plan into action. He had spent months befriending 11 and helping her develop her powers. Henry had watched 11 struggle at the laboratory, seeing how the other numbered children bullied her and how Dr. Brenner pushed her beyond her limits. Henry had positioned himself as 11's only friend, the one person in the facility who treated her with kindness and understanding. 11 trusted Henry completely. She had no idea that he was actually Number 1, the first and most powerful test subject. She did not know that he had murdered his own family years ago. She saw him only as a gentle orderly who wanted to help her. Henry approached 11 and told her that he wanted to help her escape from the laboratory. He explained that Dr. Brenner was keeping them both prisoner and that they needed to get away. Henry gave 11 a key card that would allow her to access restricted areas of the facility. He instructed her to go to a specific room in the basement and wait for him there. 11 believed everything Henry told her. She thought they were going to escape together and finally be free from Dr. Brenner's control. She had no reason to doubt Henry's intentions. He had been nothing but kind to her for as long as she could remember. 11 used the keycard exactly as Henry instructed. She made her way through the laboratory's corridors to the basement level. She found the room Henry had described and went inside. She waited there for Henry to arrive. When Henry finally came to the basement room, he revealed something crucial to 11. He explained that he could not leave the facility because of something in his neck. Henry showed 11 a small device that was implanted under his skin. This was the inhibitor chip that Dr. Brenner had put in Henry years ago to suppress his powers. Henry told 11 that this chip was keeping him trapped and that he needed her help to remove it. 11 looked at the chip with her powers. She could sense the device under Henry's skin. Henry asked her to use her telekinetic abilities to pull the chip out. 11 focused her mind on the small object. She concentrated all her power on the chip and began pulling it through Henry's flesh. The chip slowly emerged from Henry's neck until it was completely removed. 11 had no idea what she had just done. She thought she was helping a friend escape. In reality, she had just released the most dangerous person in the entire facility. The moment the inhibitor chip was out of his neck, Henry's powers returned. For years, his abilities had been locked away and suppressed. Now they came flooding back all at once. Henry could feel his telepathy and telekinesis activating again. He could sense minds around him. He could move objects with his thoughts. After so long being powerless, Henry was finally himself again. He was finally free to do what he had been planning for years. Guards at the laboratory had detected that something was wrong. They realized 11 had accessed a restricted area using a keycard she should not have. Security personnel rushed to the basement to find out what was happening. When the guards arrived and found 11, they tried to apprehend her. Henry told 11 to hide in a closet and stay there. He wanted her out of the way for what was about to happen. 11 did as Henry asked and hid herself inside a nearby closet. She watched through the crack in the door as Henry stepped forward to face the guards. What happened next was over in seconds. Henry raised his hand toward the guards and activated his powers. The guards' bodies were crushed instantly. Their bones broke and their bodies twisted in ways that should have been impossible. Henry killed them with his mind, not even touching them physically. The guards fell to the floor, dead before they could react. This was just the beginning. Henry did not stop with the guards. He walked out of the basement and began moving through the corridors of Hawkins' laboratory. He was about to commit mass murder on a scale that had never been seen before. Henry went through the facility, systematically killing everyone he encountered. Scientists who had worked on the experiments died in the hallways. Staff members who had helped run the laboratory were crushed by Henry's telekinetic powers. Security personnel who tried to stop him were killed before they could draw their weapons. Henry showed no hesitation and no mercy. These people had been part of the system that imprisoned him. They had participated in Dr. Brenner's experiments. They represented the broken human society that Henry despised. In Henry's mind, they all deserved to die. He walked calmly through the laboratory, leaving a trail of bodies behind him. Blood covered the walls and floors. The entire facility became a scene of horror. The worst part of Henry's massacre happened in the Rainbow Room. This was a colorful play area where the numbered children spent time together when they were not training or being tested. The Rainbow Room had bright walls and toys and games. It was meant to look cheerful and friendly, though of course the children who lived there were still prisoners. On September 8th, the numbered children were in the Rainbow Room together. These children ranged in age and ability. They included number 2, number 3, number 4, and all the others up through number 17. These were the kids who had been created through Dr. Brenner's experiments, given powers artificially, unlike Henry, who was born with his abilities. Some of these children had bullied 11. They had made fun of her and treated her badly, but they were still just children. They were victims of Dr. Brenner's program, just like 11 was. They had never chosen to be test subjects. They had been raised in the laboratory and knew nothing else. Henry did not care about any of this. He entered the Rainbow Room and the children looked at him. They recognized him as one of the orderlies, someone who worked at the lab. They did not understand what was happening. Henry began killing the children. He used the same power he had used on his mother and sister years ago at the Creel house. One by one, the numbered children lifted into the air. Their bodies twisted and their bones broke. Their limbs snapped at wrong angles. Their eyes were forced back into their skulls. The death was agonizing and horrifying. The children screamed and cried, but there was nothing they could do against Henry's mental powers. They could not fight back. They could not escape. Henry murdered every single one of them. Number 2, number 3, all the way through the numbers. They all died in the Rainbow Room. Their small bodies fell to the floor, broken and lifeless. Dr. Brenner was present in the Rainbow Room when the massacre began. He saw what Henry was doing and tried to stop him somehow. Henry attacked Dr. Brenner with his powers. Brenner was thrown across the room and injured badly. Blood poured from wounds on Brenner's body. But Henry did not kill Brenner. For reasons that were never fully explained, Henry left Dr. Brenner alive. Perhaps Henry wanted Brenner to suffer by seeing all his work destroyed. Perhaps Henry was getting tired from using his powers so much in such a short time. Perhaps Henry felt that death was too easy for Brenner, and that living with the guilt would be worse punishment. Whatever the reason, Brenner survived while everyone else around him died. 11 eventually emerged from the closet where Henry had told her to hide. She walked through the laboratory and saw the results of Henry's rampage. Dead bodies were everywhere. The walls were covered in blood. The hallways that had once been clean and white were now scenes of slaughter. 11 moved through this nightmare until she reached the Rainbow Room. There she found the bodies of all the other numbered children. These were kids she had grown up with, children she had known for years. They were all dead now, killed in the most brutal way imaginable.
11 was devastated by what she saw.
Then 11 saw Henry. He was standing in the Rainbow Room, covered in blood. He looked calm despite what he had just done. Henry had been waiting for 11 to find him. He wanted to talk to her. He wanted to explain himself and his actions. This was the moment when Henry would reveal his true identity and tell 11 everything about who he really was. Henry began speaking to 11. He told her that he was not just an orderly. He was number 1, the first test subject, the original person with powers before any of the others existed. Henry explained his entire history to 11. He told her about his childhood in the Creel house. He described how he had discovered black widow spiders in the attic and how they had inspired him. Henry explained his philosophy about human civilization being broken and meaningless. He told 11 about how he had read his family's minds and seen their thoughts. He described killing his mother and sister at the dinner table. As Henry spoke, 11 saw visions of what he was describing. Henry used his powers to show her images from his past. 11 saw young Henry in the Creel house. She saw him watching the spiders. She saw his family at dinner. She witnessed the murders of Virginia and Alice Creel. Henry wanted 11 to understand his perspective. He wanted her to see that he had reasons for what he believed. Henry explained that Dr. Brenner had taken him after the murders and turned him into number 1. He described years of being imprisoned and experimented on. He told 11 that the inhibitor chip had kept his powers suppressed until she removed it. Henry then explained his worldview to 11 in detail. He said that human society was built on lies and pretending. He claimed that people were weak creatures who followed meaningless rules without questioning them. Henry believed that humans created artificial structures like time and order to feel safe, but that these structures were actually cages. He said that everyone was trapped in these cages and did not even realize it. Henry saw himself as different from normal humans. He believed he was a predator, something superior to ordinary people. He thought that predators were necessary and natural. Henry told 11 that she was also a predator, that she was better than normal humans, just like he was. Henry described his vision for the future. He wanted to destroy human civilization completely. He wanted to tear down all the structures and rules that people had built. Henry believed he could reshape the world into something better, something without the weakness and lies of humanity. He saw this as a good thing, as liberation rather than destruction. In Henry's mind, he was not a villain. He was someone who could see the truth that others were blind to. He thought he was doing what needed to be done. Then Henry made his offer to 11. He asked her to join him in his mission. Henry wanted 11 to come with him and help destroy humanity together. He believed that with their combined powers, they could accomplish anything. Henry thought 11 would understand his perspective because she had also been hurt by humans. Dr. Brenner had experimented on her. The other children had bullied her, and society had rejected her. Henry assumed that 11 would want revenge just like he did. He truly believed she would see things his way and agree to join him. But 11 did not agree with Henry at all. She looked at the dead children surrounding them in the Rainbow Room. She thought about what Henry had just told her, about murdering his own mother and sister. She listened to his philosophy about destroying humanity. 11 was horrified by everything Henry represented. She realized that Henry was not her friend. He was a monster who had manipulated her. He had used her trust to remove his inhibitor chip and then murdered innocent children. 11 rejected Henry's offer completely. She refused to join him. Henry could not understand 11's reaction. He was genuinely confused about why she would not see things his way. In Henry's mind, the choice was obvious. 11 should embrace her power and help him reshape the world. But 11 saw things completely differently. She did not believe humans were broken and worthless. She did not think civilization needed to be destroyed. Despite everything that had been done to her, 11 still had compassion and love inside her. She remembered kindness she had experienced. She remembered people who had cared about her. 11 reached into her memories. She thought about her mother, Terry Ives. 11 had brief memories of being born and seeing her mother for the first time. She remembered that moment of pure love when her mother looked at her. That memory represented everything good about humanity that Henry claimed did not exist. It was real love, real connection between two people. 11 held on to that memory and let it give her strength. She needed all the strength she could find for what was about to happen. Henry realized that 11 was not going to join him willingly. He decided he would have to force her. If she would not come with him as an ally, he would make her submit. Henry believed he was stronger than 11 and that he could overpower her. He activated his abilities and attacked 11 with his mind. The two of them began a psychic battle right there in the Rainbow Room, surrounded by dead bodies. The room shook from the force of their mental powers colliding. Objects flew through the air as both of them used telekinesis. They were pushing against each other with their minds, each trying to overcome the other. Henry threw his full power at 11, trying to crush her the way he had crushed the guards and the children. But 11 fought back with everything she had. She thought about her mother's love. She pulled strength from that memory and from her will to stop Henry from hurting anyone else. The battle was intense, and neither side was winning at first. They were evenly matched, both incredibly powerful psychics, pushing their abilities to the limit. The Rainbow Room was being torn apart around them. Then something shifted. 11 found a reserve of power deep inside herself. She pushed harder than Henry expected. Slowly, she began to overpower him. Henry felt himself being pushed backward. He tried to resist, but 11 was too strong. She was fueled by love and determination, while Henry was fueled only by hatred. In that moment, love proved stronger. As 11 pushed Henry backward with her mind, something extraordinary happened. A crack appeared in the wall of the Rainbow Room. Reality itself was splitting open. A portal formed, a gateway to somewhere else. This was the first gate that 11 ever opened, though she did not do it intentionally. Her power was so strong in that moment that she literally ripped a hole between dimensions. The portal led to another world, a place that existed outside normal reality. 11 used all her remaining strength to push Henry through the portal. He flew backward into the opening in the wall. Henry tumbled through the gateway, leaving Earth behind. He fell through darkness and strange lights. The portal closed behind him, and Henry was gone. 11 collapsed from exhaustion. She had used more power than ever before in her life. The battle had drained her completely, but she had won. She had stopped Henry and saved anyone else from being killed by him. Henry crashed into an alien dimension on the other side of the portal. This place was nothing like Earth. The ground was made of dark rock, and strange floating islands drifted in the air. The sky was a dark red color, with no sun visible. Lightning bolts flashed constantly through the atmosphere, but they were wrong somehow. Red and crackling with energy that did not exist on Earth. This dimension was completely barren and empty. There were no plants, no animals, no life of any kind. Just rocks floating in a toxic atmosphere under a crimson sky. This was Dimension X, though Henry did not know that name yet. He would spend years exploring this place and eventually reshape it into something else entirely. But first, Henry had to survive. The dimension he had been thrown into was extremely hostile to human life. The atmosphere was poisonous and began attacking Henry's body immediately. His skin started burning from exposure to the toxic air. Then the lightning started hitting him. Bolts of red energy struck Henry over and over. Each strike was agonizing. The lightning burned through his flesh and charred his skin. Henry screamed in pain as the dimension tortured him. The transformation that happened to Henry was horrifying. His human appearance was destroyed completely. The toxic atmosphere and the constant lightning strikes melted his flesh. His skin became charred and cracked. His face was burned until it was almost unrecognizable. Henry's body was mutilated beyond anything a normal person could survive. The pain was unimaginable, but somehow Henry lived through it. His strong psychic powers may have kept him alive when anyone else would have died. Or perhaps the dimension itself changed him, making him into something that could survive in this hostile environment. When the torture finally ended, Henry was no longer human in appearance. His skin was black and burned. His body was covered in scars and wounds that would never heal. Vines and organic matter from the dimension had begun growing into his flesh, connecting him to this alien world. Henry had become a monster, a creature that looked like something from a nightmare. This was Vecna, though that name would not be given to him until many years later, when the kids in Hawkins needed something to call the entity that was killing their friends. Henry stood up in Dimension X despite his horrific injuries. He looked around at the barren wasteland he had been banished to. At first, Henry thought 11 had sent him to his death. He believed this dimension was his punishment, a kind of purgatory where he would suffer forever. But as Henry explored his new environment, his perspective changed. He realized that he had not been sent to hell. He had been sent somewhere new and unspoiled. This dimension had never been touched by humans. There was no human civilization here, no structures or rules or lies. It was exactly what Henry had always wanted, a world without humanity. Henry began to see his banishment as an opportunity rather than a punishment. He had been reborn in this dimension, transformed from a human into something greater. His body was monstrous now, but his powers were stronger than ever. The dimensions seemed to respond to him. He could feel a connection to this place. Henry decided that he would make this dimension his own. He would explore it and understand it, and eventually use it to accomplish his original mission. He had wanted to destroy human civilization and reshape the world. Now he had been given the tools to do exactly that. September 8, 1979 was the day Henry Creel died and Vecna was born. It was the day when the first gate between dimensions was opened. It was the day when the chain of events began that would lead to everything that happened in Hawkins over the next several years. Will Byers being taken in 1983, the Mind Flayer attacking in 1984 and 1985, the murders in 1986, all of it traced back to this single day. If 11 had not banished Henry to Dimension X, none of the future horrors would have occurred, but she had no choice. She had to stop Henry from killing more people. She could not have known that sending him to another dimension would eventually put the entire world in danger. 11 saved everyone in that moment, but she also created the greatest threat Hawkins would ever face. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to Shaping the Mind Flayer. Vecna becomes ruler of the Upside Down. After Henry was banished to Dimension X on September 8, 1979, he found himself alone in a world unlike anything that existed on Earth. The dimension he had been thrown into was completely alien and hostile. His body had been horribly mutilated by the toxic atmosphere and the strange red lightning that constantly flashed through the sky. Henry's human appearance was destroyed, his flesh burned and scarred beyond recognition. But despite these terrible injuries, Henry survived. His strong psychic powers kept him alive in this hostile environment. As Henry stood in this strange new world and looked around at the barren landscape, he began to understand that his banishment was not the end of his story. It was actually the beginning of something much larger. At first, Henry believed that 11 had sent him to his death. He thought this dimension was meant to be his grave, a purgatory where he would suffer forever as punishment for his crimes. The dimension seemed designed to torture him with its poisonous air and endless lightning strikes. Henry felt like he had been sent to hell itself. But as the pain subsided and Henry began to explore his surroundings, his perspective started to change. He realized that he was not in hell at all. He was somewhere completely new. This dimension had never been touched by human beings. There was no human civilization here, no cities or roads or buildings. There were no people following meaningless rules or pretending to have emotions they did not feel.
This world was exactly what Henry had always dreamed about, a place unspoiled by mankind.
Henry began walking through Dimension X, exploring this barren wasteland. The landscape was strange and alien. Dark rocks floated in the air with no support, defying the laws of physics that governed Earth. The ground was made of dark stone, and there was no soil or dirt like on Earth. The sky above was a deep red color, with no sun or stars visible. The red lightning continued to flash constantly, illuminating the dimension in brief bursts of crimson light. Everything about this place felt wrong and unnatural by Earth standards. But to Henry, it was perfect. This was a world without humans, a blank canvas where he could create something new. As Henry explored deeper into Dimension X, he encountered something extraordinary. He found a massive, swirling cloud floating in the air. This cloud was made of countless tiny particles that moved together in complex patterns. The particles were dark, almost black, with occasional flashes of light running through them. The cloud had no definite shape. It just swirled and moved through the air like smoke, but it seemed to have some kind of presence or awareness. Henry could sense something about this cloud of particles. It felt alive in some way, though not alive like a person or animal. It was something else entirely, something Henry had never encountered before. Henry was fascinated by the cloud of particles. He watched it move and shift, studying its behavior. The cloud seemed to respond to his presence, moving slightly when he got near it. Henry realized that this cloud might be the key to everything he wanted to accomplish. He had been banished to this dimension, alone, with no way to return to Earth and complete his mission to destroy humanity. But this cloud of particles offered possibilities. If Henry could control this cloud, if he could shape it and use it, he might be able to extend his reach back to Earth. He might be able to accomplish his goals even from this alien dimension. Henry decided to try something. He reached out with his psychic powers toward the cloud of particles. His telepathy and telekinesis had always allowed him to control and manipulate things. Henry focused his mind on the swirling cloud and began to push his will into it. The particles responded to his mental commands. They moved the way Henry wanted them to move. He could shape the cloud with his thoughts, forming it into different configurations. Henry realized that these particles were incredibly responsive to psychic influence. They were like an extension of his own mind, a tool he could use to manifest his will in physical form. As Henry experimented with the particles, he remembered something from his childhood in the Creel house. He thought about the black widow spiders he had loved so much when he was young. Henry had spent hours in the attic of his family home watching those spiders. He had drawn pictures of them in his notebook, sketching their 8 legs and the distinctive shape of their bodies. Henry had always seen the Black Widow as the ultimate predator, small and underestimated but deadly and efficient. He had modeled his own self-image on these spiders, seeing himself as a predator that others looked down on because they did not understand his true power. Henry decided to shape the cloud of particles into the form of a spider. Using his psychic powers, he manipulated the swirling mass into a specific configuration. The particles responded to his commands and began forming into the shape Henry envisioned. Slowly, the shapeless cloud transformed into something recognizable. It became a massive, spider-like creature with multiple legs extending from a central body. The creature was enormous, much larger than any real spider could ever be. It looked like something out of a nightmare, a cosmic horror that defied natural laws. This was the Mind Flayer,
though Henry did not call it that name.
He had created it based on his childhood drawings and his own twisted vision of what a perfect predator should look like. The Mind Flayer was not just a shape made of particles. It was something more than that. As Henry formed the creature, he established a connection with it. His mind merged with the swirling particles, creating a link between Henry's consciousness and the Mind Flayer's physical form. The Mind Flayer became an extension of Henry himself, a tool he could use to act in the world. But the relationship was complicated. The Mind Flayer had its own presence, its own kind of awareness. It was not simply a puppet that Henry controlled. Instead, it was more like a partner or a vessel. Henry's will was at the top of the hierarchy, directing everything, but the Mind Flayer had some degree of its own existence. Through the Mind Flayer, Henry began to extend his influence across Dimension X. The particles that made up the Mind Flayer could split into smaller pieces while still remaining connected to the whole. These fragments of the Mind Flayer spread throughout the dimension, touching everything they encountered. As the particles spread, they began to connect all the life forms in Dimension X to a single consciousness. This was the creation of the Hive Mind, a psychic network that linked everything in the dimension together with Henry's will at the center. Dimension X was not completely empty. There were creatures living in this alien world, though they were nothing like Earth animals. These creatures included the beings that would eventually be called Demogorgons. The Demogorgons were predatory monsters with flower-like heads that opened to reveal rows of teeth. They were dangerous and deadly, perfect killers adapted to survive in the harsh environment of Dimension X. There were also other creatures, smaller beings and strange life forms that existed in the shadows of the dimension. All of these creatures were independent before Henry arrived. They hunted and survived on their own, following their own instincts. Henry used the Mind Flayer to bring all these creatures under his control. The particles of the Mind Flayer touched the Demogorgons and other beings, infecting them and connecting them to the Hive Mind. Once a creature was touched by the Mind Flayer's particles, it became part of the network. Its consciousness was linked to Henry's will. The creature would still move and act on its own, but ultimately, it was following Henry's commands. Every Demogorgon, every creature in the dimension, became part of a single, massive organism, with Henry as its brain and the Mind Flayer as its nervous system. This hive mind was incredibly powerful. Henry could see through the eyes of any creature connected to it. He could feel what they felt and know what they knew. He could command them to act in coordinated ways, moving entire groups of creatures with a single thought. The hive mind made Henry the absolute ruler of Dimension X. Nothing in the dimension could act against his will. Everything was under his control. Henry had become exactly what he always wanted to be, a godlike being with complete dominion over an entire world. But Henry was not satisfied with just ruling Dimension X. His original mission had been to destroy humanity and reshape Earth. Being trapped in another dimension did not change his goals. Henry wanted to find a way back to Earth so he could complete what he had started at Hawkins' laboratory. He needed the Mind Flayer and the Hive Mind to extend his reach beyond Dimension X. He needed to find a way to break through the barrier between dimensions and attack the human world. Henry began planning how he could use his new powers to accomplish this. The process of establishing his control over Dimension X took years. Henry spent a long time exploring the dimension, spreading the Mind Flayer's influence and building his power base. According to what we know from the timeline, Henry was banished to Dimension X in 1979. The first major event in Hawkins after his banishment was the disappearance of Will Byers on November 6, 1983. This means that Henry spent approximately 4 years in Dimension X before he made his first move against Earth. However, it has been stated that Vecna spent 7 years in the dimension, adapting and establishing control. This suggests that Henry's full dominion over the dimension and his complete transformation into Vecna took the full 7 years leading up to 1986, when he would make his most direct attack. During these years in Dimension X, Henry changed even more. His body continued to adapt to the alien environment. The vines and organic matter from the dimension grew into his flesh, making him part of the world he now ruled. Henry was no longer human in any meaningful sense. He had become Vecna, a monster that was part human, part upside-down creature. His connection to the hive mind was so deep that he could no longer be separated from it. Henry and the Mind Flayer and all the creatures of the dimension were merged into a single entity with many parts. The dimension itself also began to change under Henry's influence. At some point, Dimension X became the Upside Down. The barren wasteland that Henry first explored transformed into something else. The Upside Down would eventually appear as a dark mirror of Hawkins, with buildings and streets that matched the real town but covered in decay and vines. We do not know exactly how or when this transformation happened. It may have occurred when 11 opened the first gate in 1983, with the dimension somehow copying the world on the other side of the portal. Or Henry may have shaped the dimension using his powers, creating structures based on his memories of Hawkins. Whatever the cause, the empty Dimension X that Henry was banished to eventually became the Upside Down that we see in the show,
A twisted version of reality under Henry's complete control. The Mind Flayer became Henry's primary tool for interacting with Earth. Since Henry himself was trapped in the upside-down dimension, he needed the Mind Flayer to act as his vessel in the human world. The Mind Flayer's particles could travel through gates between dimensions and infect things on the other side. When the Mind Flayer's particles entered Earth, they brought Henry's consciousness with them. Through the particles, Henry could see what was happening on Earth. He could possess people and creatures, taking control of their bodies and using them as puppets. The Mind Flayer was the bridge between Henry's mind in the Upside Down and his actions in the real world. The relationship between Henry and the Mind Flayer was complex and not always completely stable. While Henry had created the Mind Flayer and controlled it, the entity had some degree of its own presence. There were times when the Mind Flayer seemed to push back against Henry's will, forcing him to reassert his dominance over the hive mind. Henry would sometimes have to relive troubling memories as the Mind Flayer tested his control. This suggests that the Mind Flayer was not simply a mindless tool, but had some kind of consciousness that could resist Henry. However, Henry's will always prevailed. He was always at the top of the hierarchy, with the Mind Flayer surpassed only by Henry himself in the chain of command within the hive mind. Everything that would happen in Hawkins over the next several years traced back to these years that Henry spent in Dimension X, establishing his power. The Demogorgon that attacked Hawkins in 1983 was sent by Henry through the hive mind. The Mind Flayer that possessed Will Byers in 1984 was Henry acting through his vessel. The flesh monster that terrorized Hawkins in 1985 was made from the Mind Flayer's particles under Henry's control. Every attack, every death, every moment of horror was ultimately caused by Henry Creel, the boy who had murdered his family in 1959 and now ruled an entire dimension as the monster called Vecna. Henry used these years to plan his ultimate attack on humanity. He experimented with different approaches, testing the limits of what he could do from the upside down. He learned how gates between dimensions could be opened, and how his power could extend through them. He discovered that killing people in certain ways could create new gates, giving him more access points to Earth. Henry was patient and methodical, building his strength and preparing for the day when he would be strong enough to finally accomplish his mission. He wanted to merge the Upside Down with Earth completely, destroying the barrier between dimensions and allowing his hive mind to consume the entire human world. The Mind Flayer was essential to all of Henry's plans. Without it, he was just a single monster trapped in another dimension. But with the Mind Flayer and the hive mind, Henry became something far more dangerous. He became a force that could reach across dimensions, control armies of creatures, and threaten the existence of all humanity. The Mind Flayer was Henry's ultimate weapon, shaped from the particles of Dimension X into a tool for destroying everything he hated about human civilization. By the time Will Byers disappeared on November 6, 1983, Henry had been in Dimension X for 4 years. He had established his control over the dimension and created the Mind Flayer. He had built his hive mind and brought all the creatures of the dimension under his command. He was ready to begin his assault on Earth, to complete the mission he had started when he murdered his family and tried to recruit 11. The boy from the Creel house had become the ruler of the Upside Down, and now he was going to use that power to destroy the world that had rejected him. Everything that happened next, all the suffering and death that would plague Hawkins, was part of Henry's ultimate plan to reshape reality itself. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Next up, the first victim, Will Byers and the November 6, 1983 abduction. November 6, 1983 was the night that changed everything for the town of Hawkins, Indiana. This was the night when a 12-year-old boy named Will Byers disappeared while riding his bike home from a friend's house. Everyone in Hawkins believed Will had been killed or kidnapped by a human predator. They organized search parties and looked through the woods and questioned suspects. The police chief, Jim Hopper, investigated the disappearance as a criminal case. Will's mother, Joyce, refused to believe her son was dead and kept trying to communicate with him through Christmas lights in her house. But nobody in Hawkins understood what had really happened to Will Byers. He had not been kidnapped by a person. He had been taken to another dimension by a monster. And that monster was acting on orders from Henry Creel, the being who would eventually be known as Vecna. The creature that took Will was called a Demogorgon. It was a predatory monster from the Upside Down, with a flower-like head that opened to reveal multiple rows of teeth. The Demogorgon was tall and humanoid in shape, but covered in strange skin and completely inhuman in appearance. It was a deadly hunter, one of the apex predators of the Upside Down dimension. But the Demogorgon was not acting on its own instincts when it took Will Byers. It was following commands from Vecna through the hive mind that connected all creatures in the Upside Down. Vecna sent the Demogorgon to capture Will specifically. This was not a random attack or an accident. It was a deliberate kidnapping ordered by Vecna as part of his larger plans. On the night of November 6th, Will was riding his bicycle home from his friend Mike Wheeler's house. It was dark, and Will was alone on the road. Suddenly, the Demogorgon appeared. We do not know exactly how the Demogorgon crossed from the Upside Down into the real world at that moment. There was a gate at Hawkins' laboratory that Eleven had opened when she made psychic contact with the Demogorgon earlier that same day. But the gate was supposedly contained within the lab. The Demogorgon may have been able to create temporary portals or move through weak spots between dimensions. However it happened, the Demogorgon manifested on the road near Will. Will saw the creature and was terrified. He pedaled his bike as fast as he could, trying to escape from the monster. Will made it to his house and ran inside, but the Demogorgon followed him. The creature entered the Byers' home, chasing Will through the house. Will tried to hide and even grabbed a rifle to defend himself, but he was just a child facing a supernatural predator. The Demogorgon cornered Will in the shed behind the house. Then the creature took Will, pulling him through a portal into the Upside Down dimension. Will vanished from the real world completely, leaving no trace except his abandoned bicycle on the road. Will found himself alone in the Upside Down. The dimension was a dark, twisted version of Hawkins. Everything looked similar to the real town, but wrong somehow. The buildings and streets were there, but covered in decay and organic vines. The air was filled with floating particles that looked with ash or spores. The sky was dark and stormy, with red lightning flashing constantly. There was no sun and no normal light. Everything was cold and hostile. Will was trapped in this nightmare world with no way to get home and no idea how to survive. But Will did survive. For several days, Will managed to stay alive in the Upside Down, despite being hunted by the Demogorgon. He hid in different locations, moving through the upside-down version of Hawkins to avoid the monster. Will found Castle Byers, the fort he had built in the woods near his house. The upside-down version of Castle Byers gave Will some shelter. He also discovered that he could communicate with his mother in the real world through electrical devices. Will made the lights flicker in Joyce's house, spelling out messages to tell her he was alive. He even spoke to Joyce through the wall of the house, with his voice coming through from the other dimension. Joyce could hear Will calling for help, though the communication was distorted and difficult. Will's ability to survive for so long was remarkable. He was just a 12-year-old child with no special training or powers. He had no food or clean water. He was being hunted by a deadly monster in a toxic environment. Most people would have died within hours in the Upside Down. But Will kept hiding and running and finding ways to stay alive. He was resourceful and determined. He refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. Will's survival was extraordinary, and it caught Vecna's attention in a significant way. Eventually, Will's luck ran out. The Demogorgon found Will and captured him. Will was taken to the upside-down version of Hawkins Public Library. This location was significant because the library appeared to be the Demogorgon's feeding place, where it brought victims to consume them. When Will's friends and family finally located him at the end of Season 1, they found him at the library in the Upside Down. Will was unconscious and dying. He had been affixed to the wall of the library by organic vines that grew throughout the Upside Down. The vines wrapped around Will's body, holding him in place against the wall. He could not move or escape. But Will had not simply been left there by the Demogorgon. Something else had happened to him while he was trapped in the library. Vecna himself had come to see Will. This detail was revealed much later in Season 5, when Vecna confronted Will again and reminded him of what had happened. Vecna had emerged from the shadows while Will was unconscious and attached to the wall. Vecna stood before the captured child, looking at him with interest. Vecna was excited about what he saw. He had plans for Will, plans that went beyond simply killing him. Vecna commanded one of the tendrils or vines to attach itself to Will's mouth. This vine functioned as a feeding tube, forcing organic matter from the upside down into Will's body. The vine pumped upside-down particles and biological material into Will, infecting him with the essence of the dimension. This infection would have lasting effects on Will, creating a connection between the boy and the upside down that would persist even after he was rescued. As Will woke up and began panicking and gasping for air around the vine in his mouth, Vecna ran his hand across Will's forehead. Vecna spoke to the terrified child, making a promise. He told Will that the two of them would do such beautiful things together. This moment was crucial to understanding Vecna's ultimate plan. Vecna was not killing Will like the Demogorgon killed other victims. He was experimenting with Will, testing to see if a human child could survive being infected with the Upside Down and connected to the hive mind. Vecna wanted to see if Will could be broken and controlled, transformed into something useful. Will's survival and the way he responded to the infection showed Vecna that his theory was correct. Children could survive the process. Their minds and bodies could be invaded and manipulated. They could be reshaped into vessels for Vecna's will. Will was eventually rescued by his mother Joyce and Chief Hopper. They entered the Upside Down through the gate at Hawkins' laboratory and found Will dying at the library. They pulled him free from the vines and performed CPR to bring him back to life. Will was taken to the hospital and treated for his injuries. He survived and was eventually able to go home with his family. On the surface, it seemed like Will had been saved and the nightmare was over. But the infection Vecna had given Will remained inside him. A slug-like creature made from upside-down material was growing in Will's body. Will coughed up this slug in his bathroom, expelling it from his system. But even after the slug was gone, Will was not truly free. Will continued to have visions of the Upside Down throughout the following year. He would see flashes of the other dimension overlapping with reality. The doctors believed Will was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder from his ordeal. But the visions were more than psychological trauma. They were a sign that Will was still connected to the Upside Down and to Vecna through the hive mind. In October 1984, this connection became much stronger. The Mind Flayer, acting as Vecna's vessel, possessed Will's body. The possession allowed Vecna to see through Will's eyes and use the boy as a spy in Hawkins. Will became a part of the hive mind, experiencing the thoughts and feelings of the entity controlling him. During the possession, Will described what it felt like to be connected to the Mind Flayer. He said the entity was spreading and growing, trying to take over everything. Will could feel the Mind Flayer's cold presence in his mind. He knew what the entity wanted. It wanted to kill everyone except Will, using the boy as its only vessel in the human world. This possession was proof that Vecna's experiment with Will had succeeded. A child could be infected, connected to the hive mind, and used as a tool by Vecna. Will's mind could be invaded and his body controlled from the Upside Down. Joyce and Will's friends eventually found a way to drive the Mind Flayer out of Will's body. They heated up a room until it was unbearably hot, using the fact that the Mind Flayer preferred cold. They trapped Will in the hot room and called to him, reminding him of memories and love. Joyce told Will stories about his childhood and his father, and all the happy times they shared. Will's friends talked to him about their friendship and adventures together. These memories and emotional connections gave Will the strength to push back against the Mind Flayer. Eventually, Will expelled the entity from his body. The black particles of the Mind Flayer poured out of Will's mouth and fled, returning to the Upside Down. But even after the Mind Flayer was driven out, Will retained his connection to the Upside Down. He could sense when creatures from that dimension were nearby. In Season 3, Will felt the Mind Flayer's presence when it returned to Hawkins through a new gate. He described feeling cold on the back of his neck, a sensation that warned him the entity was close. This lingering connection proved that Vecna's infection of Will had permanent effects. Will could not fully escape the Upside Down or the hive mind. Part of him would always be linked to that dimension and to Vecna. The significance of what happened to Will became fully clear in Season 5. When Vecna confronted Will again, he explained that Will had been the first. Vecna told Will that his survival and transformation had shown Vecna what could be achieved. Will had proven that a child could be taken to the Upside Down, infected with its essence, connected to the hive mind, and used as a vessel. Will had demonstrated that young minds and bodies were weak enough to break, but strong enough to survive the process. This discovery became the foundation for Vecna's ultimate plan in Season 5. In Season 5, Vecna began kidnapping children from Hawkins. His goal was to capture 12 children total and transform them into vessels just like he had done with Will years earlier. Vecna explained his reasoning when he spoke to Will. He said that he chose children because their young minds were weak and easily shaped. Children could be broken and controlled in ways that adults could not. They were the perfect vessels for Vecna's purposes. Will had been the inspiration for this entire strategy. Everything Vecna learned from experimenting on Will in 1983 informed his approach in Season 5. Vecna told Will directly that Will himself had shown Vecna what was possible. If Will had died in the Upside Down in 1983, Vecna might never have realized that children could serve as vessels. If Will had not survived the infection and the connection to the hive mind, Vecna would not have known this approach could work. But Will did survive. He lived through the kidnapping, the infection, the possession, and everything else. His strength and resilience proved to Vecna that the plan was viable. In a horrible irony, Will's own survival as a child enabled Vecna to threaten other children years later. Will's experience in 1983 was the beginning of everything that followed. The Demogorgon's attack in Season 1, the Mind Flayer's possession in Season 2, the Flesh Monster in Season 3, the murders in Season 4, and the kidnapping of children in Season 5 all traced back to that first abduction. Vecna learned from Will that children were the key to his plans. He spent years developing his strategy based on what he discovered through Will. The infection, the hive-mind connection, the ability to control and reshape a young mind. All of this was tested on Will first before Vecna tried to replicate it on a larger scale. Will's role in Vecna's ultimate plan was tragic. He had been an innocent child riding his bike home when he was taken. He had done nothing to deserve what happened to him, but through no fault of his own, Will became the prototype for Vecna's vessel program. His suffering enabled Vecna to refine his methods. His survival proved the concept. Every child that Vecna targeted in Season 5 was targeted because of what Vecna learned from Will. The connection between Will and Vecna that began on November 6, 1983, would never truly end. It would persist through the years and ultimately bring them face to face again in the final battle for Hawkins and the world. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the Demogorgon strategy, Season 1's attack on Hawkins, 1983. November 6, 1983 was not just the day Will Byers disappeared. It was also the day when the barrier between Earth and the Upside Down was breached for the first time since Eleven had banished Henry Creel to Dimension X in 1979. On this day, a gate opened at Hawkins National Laboratory, creating a direct connection between the human world and the dimension where Vecna ruled. This gate, which would later be called the Mother Gate, was the beginning of everything that would terrorize Hawkins for years to come. What happened that day would set in motion events that Vecna would later use as part of his larger plan, though the opening of the gate itself was not something Vecna orchestrated directly. The gate opened because of Eleven. She was still living at Hawkins' laboratory under the control of Dr. Martin Brenner, the scientist who had taken her as a baby and raised her in captivity. Brenner had been training Eleven to use her psychic powers for government purposes. He wanted her to spy on enemies of the United States, particularly Soviet agents during the Cold War. On November 6th, Brenner put Eleven through an experiment that would change everything. He placed her in a sensory deprivation tank, a special pool filled with salt water where Eleven could float weightlessly. The tank helped Eleven enter a deeper level of psychic connection, allowing her to project her consciousness across vast distances. Brenner's goal for this experiment was to have Eleven make contact with a Russian agent who was speaking in a room in the Soviet Union. Eleven was supposed to listen to what the Russian was saying and report back to Brenner. This was the kind of spying mission that Brenner had been training Eleven for her entire life. Eleven entered the void, a black, empty space that she accessed through her powers. In the void, Eleven could see and hear people from anywhere in the world. They appeared as psychic projections that Eleven could observe without them knowing she was there. Eleven found the Russian agent and listened to him speaking, exactly as Brenner had instructed. But then something unexpected happened. While Eleven was in the void listening to the Russian, she encountered something else. A creature appeared in the void with her. This creature was the Demogorgon from the Upside Down. The monster should not have been in the void at all. The void was supposed to be a space that only existed in Eleven's mind, a psychic projection that she used to find people. But the Demogorgon manifested there anyway. The creature was tall and menacing, with its distinctive flower-like head. Eleven was terrified when she saw it. She had never encountered anything like this before. The Demogorgon appeared in the void because Eleven's psychic projection was so powerful that it was bleeding through to the Upside Down. Her consciousness had reached so far and so strongly that the barrier between dimensions became thin. The Demogorgon sensed her presence from the other side and appeared in the psychic space. Whether this was because the creature was drawn to her psychic energy, or because the dimensions were overlapping at that moment, we do not know for certain. What we do know is that Eleven's powerful psychic state created a connection that allowed the Demogorgon to manifest in her void. Eleven panicked when she saw the Demogorgon. She was frightened by the creature and did not understand what it was. In her fear, Eleven reached out and touched the Demogorgon in the void. This touch created a direct connection between Eleven and the creature. It also created a connection between dimensions. The moment Eleven made physical contact with the Demogorgon in the void, reality split open at Hawkins' laboratory. A gate formed in the wall of the room where Eleven's sensory deprivation tank was located. The barrier between Earth and the Upside Down ripped apart, creating a portal that connected the two worlds directly. The gate that opened was not small or temporary. It was a large tear in reality, big enough for creatures to pass through. The opening was violent and explosive. The walls of the laboratory room cracked, and the gate glowed with strange energy. The Demogorgon immediately came through the gate from the Upside Down into the real world. The creature emerged into Hawkins' laboratory, free to hunt in the human world for the first time. Scientists and staff at the laboratory saw the monster and panicked. Some tried to run while others tried to contain the situation. The Demogorgon killed several people at the laboratory during its emergence, tearing through anyone who got in its way. Dr. Brenner and the government officials at Hawkins' lab tried to control the situation. They sealed off the room with the gate and established a containment protocol. They built barriers around the gate and stationed armed guards to watch it. They monitored the portal constantly, trying to understand what it was and how to close it. But despite their efforts, they could not seal the gate. It remained open, a permanent wound in reality. The Upside Down was now connected to Hawkins, and there was nothing the scientists could do to fix it. The Demogorgon was now loose in Hawkins. The creature could move between the Upside Down and the real world through the gate at the laboratory. The Demogorgon also seemed able to move through weak spots in the barrier between dimensions. Where the membrane between worlds was thin, the creature could slip through, emerging in different locations around Hawkins. The Demogorgon used these abilities to hunt throughout Hawkins and the surrounding woods. The creature was a predator that responded to blood and noise, tracking prey through scent and sound. It was designed to kill and feed, a perfect hunting machine adapted to the harsh environment of the Upside Down. On the same night that the gate opened, November 6th, the Demogorgon encountered Will Byers. Will was riding his bike home from his friend Mike Wheeler's house when he came across the creature. Will saw the monster and was terrified. He pedaled his bike as fast as he could, trying to escape. Will made it to his house and ran inside, but the Demogorgon followed him. The creature chased Will through the Byers' home and cornered him in the shed behind the house. The Demogorgon pulled Will through a weak spot in the dimensional barrier, taking him into the Upside Down. Will became the first person to be captured and taken to the other dimension, rather than simply killed. Whether the Demogorgon's pursuit of Will that night was driven purely by predatory instinct, or whether there was already some influence from Vecna through the hive mind, remains unclear from what happened in 1983. The Demogorgon was hunting based on typical predator behavior, responding to noise and movement. Will was simply the prey it successfully caught that night. What we learn much later, in Season 5, is that Vecna did take special interest in Will once he was in the Upside Down. Vecna came to see Will at the library and conducted his experiment on the boy, infecting him and testing whether a child could survive as a vessel. But in the moment of Will's capture on November 6th, the Demogorgon appeared to be acting as a predator, hunting available prey. The Demogorgon did not only take Will, it also killed other people in Hawkins during its time hunting in the human world. The most notable victim was Barbara Holland, a teenage girl who was best friends with Nancy Wheeler. Barb was at a party at Steve Harrington's house on the night of November 6th. While the other teenagers were inside the house, Barb sat alone by the swimming pool. She had cut her hand earlier, and there was blood on her palm. The Demogorgon was attracted to the blood. Blood was one of the primary things that drew the creature to its prey. The Demogorgon found Barb by the pool and grabbed her, pulling her through the barrier into the upside-down dimension. Barb found herself alone in the upside-down version of Steve's backyard. She was sitting by the empty pool in the dark, cold dimension. Barb called for help, but no one could hear her. The Demogorgon returned and killed Barb quickly. Her body was left in the upside down, partially consumed by the creature. When Nancy later found Barb's corpse in the upside down, it was clear that she had suffered a horrible death. Unlike Will, who was kept alive, Barb was simply killed and eaten. The Demogorgon treated her as normal prey rather than something to preserve. The Demogorgon killed other people as well during its time hunting in Hawkins. Hunters in the woods encountered the creature and were killed. A scientist from Hawkins' laboratory who knew about the gate was murdered in his home. Each death created fear and confusion in the town. The police investigated these deaths as murders or animal attacks, not understanding that a supernatural monster was responsible. The Demogorgon left very little evidence behind. Bodies were often taken to the upside down or partially consumed, making it difficult for authorities to understand what had happened. The Demogorgon's activities in Hawkins, whether guided by Vecna's will through the hive mind or driven by its own predatory nature, served purposes that would become clear later. The creature was demonstrating that beings from the upside down could survive and hunt in the human world. Each attack tested the barrier between dimensions and showed how vulnerable humans were to these supernatural threats. The chaos and fear created by the killings drew attention throughout Hawkins, while the gate at the laboratory remained open and unguarded by anyone who understood its true danger. As the Demogorgon continued hunting in Hawkins, a group of people began searching for Will and investigating the strange events. Will's mother, Joyce, refused to believe her son was dead. She experienced strange phenomena in her house, with lights flickering and Will's voice coming through the walls. Joyce bought Christmas lights and strung them up throughout her house, discovering she could communicate with Will through the lights. Will was spelling out messages from the upside down, proving he was alive somewhere. Chief Jim Hopper investigated Will's disappearance and began to suspect that Hawkins' laboratory was involved. He broke into the lab and discovered evidence of their experiments and the gate. Meanwhile, Will's friends Mike, Dustin, and Lucas found 11 in the woods. She had escaped from Hawkins' laboratory after opening the gate, running away from Dr. Brenner and the agents who were searching for her. 11 was scared and alone. The boys took her in and hid her in Mike's basement. They discovered that 11 had psychic powers and could help them find Will. 11 explained in limited words that Will was in a dangerous place, somewhere dark and cold. She called it the Upside Down. Using her powers, 11 helped the boys understand that Will was trapped in another dimension and that a monster was hunting him. Dr. Brenner and his agents were desperately searching for 11. They wanted her back under their control, especially now that she had opened a gate to another dimension. Brenner sent teams throughout Hawkins looking for 11. He set up surveillance and interrogated anyone who might have seen her. Brenner's search put additional pressure on the group of people trying to save Will. They had to hide 11 from the government while also using her powers to locate Will and fight the Demogorgon. The situation came to a head at Hawkins Middle School. The Demogorgon attacked the school, breaking through from the upside down to hunt its prey. 11, the boys, and several others were trapped in the school with the monster. The Demogorgon was closing in, ready to kill them all, but 11 decided to make a stand. She had been running and hiding since she escaped the laboratory. Now, she chose to fight. 11 confronted the Demogorgon directly, using her psychic powers against the creature. The battle between 11 and the Demogorgon was intense. The monster was strong and vicious, a perfect killing machine, but 11's powers were stronger. She focused all her energy on the Demogorgon, using her telekinesis to attack it. The creature roared and tried to reach her, but 11 held it back. She pushed harder, channeling more power than she had ever used before. The Demogorgon began to disintegrate under the assault. Its body dissolved into particles, breaking apart from the inside out. 11 completely destroyed the creature, reducing it to nothing. The Demogorgon was dead, eliminated by 11's overwhelming psychic strength. But killing the Demogorgon cost 11 greatly. She used so much power that she vanished from sight. The boys who were with her saw 11 disappear, fading away as if she had been erased from existence. They did not know what happened to her, or if she was alive. In reality, 11 had been pulled into the Upside Down by the massive expenditure of energy. She survived, but was lost in the other dimension, separated from her friends. It would take time for 11 to find her way back to the real world. The death of the Demogorgon was a victory for the people of Hawkins, but it did not end the threat. The gate at Hawkins' Lager remained open. The portal between dimensions was still active, still connecting Earth to the Upside Down. Hopper and Joyce had used the gate to enter the Upside Down and rescue Will from the library where he had been kept. They brought Will back to the real world and saved his life. But the gate stayed open even after they returned. The scientists at the laboratory continued their containment efforts, but they could not close the portal. The wound in reality remained, a constant danger to the town. What we understand now, looking back with the knowledge revealed in later seasons, is that all creatures in the Upside Down are connected to Vecna through the hive mind he created. The Demogorgon was part of this hive mind. Whether Vecna was actively directing the Demogorgon's actions in 1983, or whether the creature was operating on instinct while connected to Vecna's consciousness, is not entirely clear from what happened that year. What is clear is that Vecna, as the anchor of the hive mind, was connected to everything that occurred. He would have sensed what the Demogorgon sensed. He would have known about the gate opening and about 11's presence in Hawkins. The events of Season 1 created opportunities that Vecna would exploit in the years that followed. The gate remained open, giving him a permanent connection to Earth. Will Byers had been taken to the Upside Down and infected, proving that children could survive exposure to that dimension. 11 had revealed her location and demonstrated her power. All of these pieces of information would factor into Vecna's evolving plans. Whether he orchestrated the specific events of 1983 or simply took advantage of what happened, the result was the same. The barrier between worlds had been breached, and Vecna now had the access he needed to continue his mission to destroy humanity and reshape the world according to his twisted vision. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Mind Flayer Possession, Season 2's Invasion Attempt. October 1984. By October 1984, almost a year had passed since Will Byers was rescued from the Upside Down. Will had returned to his normal life in Hawkins. He went to school, hung out with his friends, and tried to move on from the trauma of his abduction. But Will was not truly free from the Upside Down. He still had a connection to that dimension, a lingering infection from when Vecna had attached the feeding tube to him in the library. This connection had remained dormant inside Will for months, but it was about to become active again in a terrible way. What happened in Season 2 was the Mind Flayer, the entity that Vecna had created and shaped in the Upside Down, attempting to invade Hawkins through Will's infected body and mind. Will began experiencing what everyone believed were flashbacks or episodes of post-traumatic stress. He would suddenly see the Upside Down overlapping with reality. The normal world around him would fade away and be replaced by the dark, cold dimension where he had been trapped. In these visions, Will saw the twisted version of Hawkins covered in vines and ash. The sky was dark and stormy, with red lightning flashing across it. These episodes were frightening for Will. He did not understand why they kept happening. His mother Joyce took him to see doctors at Hawkins' laboratory. Dr. Sam Owens, who had replaced Dr. Brenner as the scientist in charge, examined Will and concluded that he was experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. Owens believed the visions were psychological, memories from Will's time in the Upside Down that his brain kept replaying. But the visions were not just psychological trauma. They were real connections to the Upside Down dimension. Will was actually seeing into that world through the infection that remained inside him. The connection between Will and the Upside Down had never been fully severed. When Will was rescued, some part of the dimension stayed with him. He had coughed up a slug-like creature made from upside-down material shortly after coming home, but that had not eliminated the connection completely. Will remained linked to the dimension on some level that the doctors could not detect or understand. During one of these episodes, Will saw something new and terrifying in his vision of the Upside Down. A massive storm was approaching in the dimension. Dark clouds swirled and moved across the sky, coming toward Will. As the storm got closer, Will realized it was not just clouds. It was a creature, an impossibly large entity that filled the sky. The creature had a shape like a spider, with multiple legs extending from a central body. This was the Mind Flayer, the being that Vecna had shaped from the particles in Dimension X years earlier. The Mind Flayer loomed over Will in the vision, enormous and threatening. Will was terrified by what he saw. He described it to his friends and family as a shadow monster, something evil that wanted to kill everyone except him. The Mind Flayer's presence in Will's visions meant that the entity was actively reaching out through the connection. The gate at Hawkins' laboratory was still open, maintaining a link between Earth and the Upside Down. Through this gate and through Will's infection, the Mind Flayer could extend its influence into the real world. The Mind Flayer was trying to expand beyond the Upside Down, to spread into Hawkins and eventually consume everything. Will was the perfect entry point because he was already infected with Upside Down material and connected to that dimension. One day, Will's connection to the Upside Down became much stronger and more dangerous. Will was outside with his friends when he had another episode, but this time, instead of just seeing the Upside Down, Will actually felt like he was there. He saw the Mind Flayer approaching him in the vision. The massive entity came closer and closer. Then the Mind Flayer reached Will, and a tendril, or part of it, went inside him. Will felt something invade his body. It was cold, incredibly cold, like ice spreading through his veins. Will collapsed, and his friends rushed him to the hospital. From that moment on, Will was possessed by the Mind Flayer. The entity had entered Will's body and merged with him. Will's consciousness was still present, but the Mind Flayer was there too, sharing his mind and body. The possession was not complete at first. Will could still act like himself most of the time, but the Mind Flayer was watching through Will's eyes and listening through Will's ears. Everything Will saw and heard, the Mind Flayer knew. This made Will a spy for the Upside Down, gathering information about Hawkins and the people trying to fight against the invasion. The possession had physical effects on Will. He became very sensitive to heat. Any warmth made him uncomfortable and distressed. This was because the Mind Flayer preferred cold environments. The Upside Down was always cold, and the Mind Flayer wanted to make Earth cold too. Will would complain whenever rooms were too warm or when people tried to give him hot drinks. He would turn down thermostats and open windows even in October weather. Joyce noticed this strange behavior but did not understand what it meant at first. Will also began having gaps in his memory. Sometimes hours would pass, and Will could not remember what happened during that time. This was because the Mind Flayer was taking full control during those periods, pushing Will's consciousness aside. During these moments of full possession, the Mind Flayer used Will's body to gather information and communicate with other parts of itself in the Upside Down. Will was essentially blacking out, while the Mind Flayer operated his body like a puppet. While the Mind Flayer was possessing Will, other things were happening beneath Hawkins. A massive network of tunnels had grown underground, spreading out from the gate at Hawkins' laboratory. These tunnels were part of the Upside Down, extending into Earth. The walls were covered in organic vines, and the air was filled with spores. The tunnels were like veins, connecting different parts of Hawkins to the gate and to the Mind Flayer's consciousness. Hopper discovered these tunnels while investigating strange pumpkin rot in local farms. He went down into the tunnels to explore and became trapped there, nearly killed by the toxic environment. Inside the tunnels, creatures were growing. These creatures were called Demodogs, which was short for Demogorgon dogs. They looked like smaller, younger versions of the Demogorgon that had terrorized Hawkins the previous year. The Demodogs started as small, slug-like creatures that Dustin found and tried to keep as a pet. He named his Pollywog Dart, but the Pollywog grew rapidly, transforming into a Demodog. Dart and other Demodogs throughout the tunnels were all connected to the Mind Flayer through the hive mind. They were soldiers in the Mind Flayer's army, ready to attack when commanded. Will's friends and family slowly realized that something was seriously wrong with him. Will's behavior became more erratic and strange. He would say things that did not make sense or react to situations in ways that seemed wrong. During a session where Dr. Owens was showing Will drawings of the tunnels that Hopper had mapped, Will suddenly became extremely agitated. He started drawing furiously, creating a massive map that covered multiple sheets of paper. Will was drawing the tunnel system from memory, even though he had never been down there. The Mind Flayer inside him knew about the tunnels and was using Will's hands to create the map. But Will himself did not understand why he was drawing or what the drawings meant. Joyce began to suspect that Will was not experiencing normal PTSD. She noticed patterns in his behavior that suggested something else was controlling him. She talked to Bob Newby, her boyfriend at the time, about what was happening. Bob suggested that Will needed to confront his fears rather than running from them. He encouraged Will to tell the Mind Flayer to go away, to stand up to the monster in his visions. Will tried to do this during his next episode. He saw the Mind Flayer approaching in the Upside Down, and he shouted at it to leave him alone, but this backfired terribly. The Mind Flayer responded by taking even stronger control over Will. The entity fully possessed him, pushing Will's consciousness deep down and taking over his body completely. When Will woke up after this full possession, he was different. His behavior changed dramatically. He was cold and emotionless. He spoke in strange ways and seemed to know things he should not know. Joyce realized that her son was not himself anymore. Something else was inside him, controlling him. The Mind Flayer was using Will as more than just a spy now. The entity was using Will to understand how to destroy the people who were trying to stop the invasion. Hopper and the others discovered that the Mind Flayer had been using Will to gather intelligence. When they discussed their plans to burn the tunnels beneath Hawkins, Will was present in the room. He heard every detail of their strategy. The Mind Flayer, watching through Will's eyes, learned about the plan. That night, when the group went into the tunnels to set them on fire, they were ambushed by demodogs. The creatures knew exactly where the humans would be, because the Mind Flayer had warned them through the hive mind connection. The ambush was nearly successful. Bob sacrificed his life to help Joyce, Hopper, and the kids escape from the demodogs that were swarming through the tunnels and into Hawkins' laboratory. Joyce realized they needed to separate Will from the Mind Flayer somehow.
She remembered that Will had said the Mind Flayer liked it cold. If the entity preferred cold, then maybe heat could drive it out. Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy took Will to Hopper's cabin in the woods. They covered the windows and turned up the heat as high as it would go. They used space heaters to make the room unbearably hot. Will began to suffer in the heat. He screamed and begged them to stop. The Mind Flayer did not want to be in that hot environment. The entity was trying to force Joyce to let Will go, but Joyce refused to stop. She knew her son was still in there somewhere, and she needed to reach him. While the room got hotter and hotter, Joyce talked to Will. She told him stories about his childhood. She reminded him of memories they shared together, happy moments from when he was young. She told him about his father leaving and how they got through it together. She told Will how much she loved him. Jonathan joined in, sharing his own memories of growing up with Will. They kept talking to Will, reaching out to his consciousness that was buried beneath the Mind Flayer's control. Slowly, Will began to respond. The real Will started pushing back against the Mind Flayer. The heat was weakening the entity's grip, and the memories were giving Will strength to fight. Will's consciousness emerged, and he was able to communicate with his mother. He told Joyce that the Mind Flayer wanted to kill everyone. He said the entity wanted to kill everyone except him, using Will as its only host in the human world. This was crucial information about the Mind Flayer's invasion plan. The exorcism continued with the heat and the memories. Joyce and Jonathan kept pushing, kept talking to Will and reminding him who he was. Finally, Will's body convulsed and he opened his mouth. Black particles poured out of Will's mouth like smoke. The Mind Flayer was being expelled from his body. The dark particles flew out of Will and escaped through cracks in the cabin, returning to the Upside Down. Will collapsed, exhausted and weak, but free. The Mind Flayer no longer possessed him. Will's consciousness was his own again. But driving the Mind Flayer out of Will did not end the invasion. The entity was still connected to Earth through the gate at Hawkins' laboratory. The demodogs were still attacking, swarming through the facility and killing anyone they found. The tunnels beneath Hawkins were still spreading. The only way to truly stop the Mind Flayer was to close the gate and sever the connection between dimensions. This is what Eleven would have to do. Eleven had spent the past year hiding in Hopper's cabin, cut off from her friends. She had been developing her powers and growing stronger. When she learned that her friends were in danger from the Mind Flayer, Eleven decided to return to Hawkins and help them. She made her way to Hawkins' laboratory where the gate was still open, still connecting Earth to the Upside Down. The gate had grown larger over the past year, spreading across the wall like a wound that would not heal. Through the gate, the dark tendrils of the Upside Down were visible, reaching into the real world. Eleven stood before the gate and focused all her power on it. She reached out with her telekinesis and began pushing the gate closed. The effort was overwhelming. The gate did not want to close. It fought against Eleven's power, pushing back with tremendous force. Eleven strained, channeling every bit of strength she had into sealing the dimensional barrier. Blood ran from her nose from the exertion. She screamed with effort as she forced the gate to contract and shrink. As Eleven closed the gate, the effects rippled through the hive mind. The demodogs that had been attacking suddenly stopped. They fell over dead or dying as the connection to the mind flare was severed. The tunnels beneath Hawkins began to decay and collapse. The vines and organic matter that had spread throughout the underground system started to rot. Everything connected to the mind flare through the gate was weakening and dying as 11 cut off the link between dimensions. 11 pushed harder, closing the gate more and more. The opening grew smaller and smaller until finally, with one last burst of power, 11 sealed it completely. The gate closed. The barrier between Earth and the Upside Down was restored. The wound in reality that had existed since November 6, 1983 was finally healed. 11 collapsed from exhaustion, having used more power than ever before in her life. But she had succeeded. The gate was closed. With the gate sealed, the mind flare was cut off from Hawkins. The entity could no longer reach through to the human world. The hive-mind connection that allowed the mind flare to control creatures on Earth was severed. The demodogs were dead. The tunnels were decaying. The invasion had been stopped. Will was free from possession and could begin recovering from the trauma. Hawkins was safe again, at least for the moment. But the mind flare was not destroyed. The entity still existed in the upside-down dimension. Closing the gate had only separated the mind flare from Earth, not eliminated it. The final scene of Season 2 showed the mind flare still present in the upside down, looming over the abandoned dimension. The entity was watching and waiting, still existing even though its connection to Earth had been cut. Through the mind flare, Vecna was still planning and preparing for future attacks. The closure of the gate was a setback for Vecna's ultimate plan, but it was not a defeat. He would find other ways to reach Earth and continue his mission to destroy humanity and reshape the world. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to The Flesh Flare, Season 3's Body Snatching Campaign, Summer 1985. By the summer of 1985, almost a year had passed since 11 closed the gate at Hawkins' laboratory. The barrier between Earth and the Upside Down had been sealed, cutting off the mind flare's connection to the human world. Hawkins seemed safe. The town had moved on from the strange events of the previous years. A new shopping mall called Starcourt had opened in the center of town, becoming the place where everyone spent their time. Life appeared to have returned to normal. But beneath Starcourt Mall, something secret and dangerous was happening. The Soviet Union had built a hidden facility deep underground, and they were attempting to reopen a gate to the Upside Down. When they finally succeeded, the mind flare's connection to Earth was restored, and a new invasion attempt began. The Soviets had learned about the gate at Hawkins' laboratory through their spy network. They knew that the United States had accidentally opened a portal to another dimension, and that this dimension contained powerful forces. The Soviets wanted access to this same power for themselves. They built their facility beneath Starcourt Mall in complete secrecy. The mall itself was partly funded by Soviet money as a cover for their underground operation. Below the shopping center, Soviet scientists and soldiers worked on a massive machine designed to tear open the barrier between dimensions. The machine was enormous, requiring tremendous amounts of energy to operate. The Soviets had to build a special power system just to run it. The machine worked by firing a concentrated beam of energy at a specific point in space. This beam was meant to cut through the dimensional barrier and create an opening to the Upside Down. The Soviets attempted this process many times throughout the spring and early summer of 1985. Each attempt failed. The barrier would resist the beam and refuse to open. The Soviet scientists could not understand why they kept failing when the Americans had successfully opened a gate years earlier. They did not know that 11's psychic powers had been essential to opening the first gate. The Soviets were trying to accomplish with machinery what had required 11's unique abilities. But the Soviets kept trying, making their machine more powerful with each attempt. They increased the energy output and refined their targeting. Finally, in July 1985, they succeeded. The machine's beam broke through the dimensional barrier and created a gate. The opening was not large at first, but it was real. A connection between Earth and the Upside Down had been re-established. Through this new gate, the energies and particles of the Upside Down could reach into Hawkins once again. The mind flare, which had been cut off from Earth since 11 closed the previous gate, now had a way back. When the new gate opened, something remarkable happened at the old Brimborn Steelworks on the outskirts of Hawkins. This abandoned factory had been where fragments of the mind flare fell dormant after the original gate closed in 1984. Those black particles had scattered across the floor of the steel mill and remained there for months, seemingly dead and inert. But they were not truly dead. They were just disconnected, waiting for a new link to the Upside Down. The moment the Soviet gate opened beneath Starcourt Mall,
the mind flare particles at the steelworks reactivated. The connection through the hive mind was restored, and the particles came back to life. The reactivated mind flare particles needed to rebuild their strength and create a physical form in the human world. The particles began by possessing small creatures. Rats throughout Hawkins started behaving strangely. They were drawn to the steelworks by the mind flare's influence through the hive mind. Dozens of rats gathered at the abandoned factory, compelled by a force they could not resist. When the rats reached the steelworks, the mind flare particles attacked them. The particles entered the rats' bodies and began a horrible process called flaying. Flaying was a way for the mind flare to consume living creatures and transform them into biomass. When a rat was flayed, its body would melt and dissolve. The flesh and blood would liquefy and become raw biological material that the mind flayer could use. The flayed rats were not just killed, but transformed into building blocks for something larger. The mind flayer was gathering biomass at the steelworks, accumulating enough material to create a physical body that could operate in the real world. But rats were small and did not provide much biomass. The mind flayer needed larger creatures to build the kind of body it wanted. It needed humans. The mind flayer began searching for a human it could possess and use to gather more victims. It found Billy Hargrove. Billy was a teenager who worked as a lifeguard at the Hawkins community pool. One night, Billy's car broke down on a dark road. As Billy tried to fix the car, the mind flayer approached him. This was not the massive shadow creature from the sky that Will had seen. This was the swarm of black particles that had reactivated at the steelworks. The particles attacked Billy and forced their way inside his body, possessing him completely. Billy's possession was different from what had happened to Will. With Will, the mind flayer had slowly taken control while Will's consciousness fought back. With Billy, the takeover was more complete and more violent. Billy became a host for the mind flayer, his mind overridden by the entity's will. Billy still looked and acted mostly normal on the outside, but inside he was controlled by the mind flayer. His personality changed. He became cold and mechanical. His only purpose was to serve the mind flayer's needs. Billy was now a tool for gathering more victims. The mind flayer used Billy to flay other people. Billy would approach someone when they were alone and vulnerable. He would overpower them or trick them somehow. Then the mind flayer particles would transfer from Billy into the new victim, possessing them too. The process was terrifying for the victims. They would be taken over by the mind flayer and lose control of their own bodies and minds. Once possessed, these people would be flayed. Their bodies would be drawn to the steelworks where they would melt and dissolve, adding their biomass to the growing collection. One of Billy's victims was Mrs. Driscoll, an elderly woman who lived alone. Billy went to her house and the mind flayer possessed her. Mrs. Driscoll became flayed and her behavior changed dramatically. She ate fertilizer and other chemical products, driven by the mind flayer's needs rather than human instincts. She ended up in the hospital where Nancy and Jonathan discovered her while investigating strange occurrences in town. Mrs. Driscoll tried to attack them, showing that she was no longer herself. Eventually, Mrs. Driscoll was drawn to the steelworks like all the other flayed people. Billy continued flaying more and more residents of Hawkins. The exact number is not known, but it was many people. These flayed individuals went to the steelworks and gathered in the old factory. There, in a horrifying display, their bodies melted. The flesh and blood of all these people liquefied and merged together into a massive pool of biomass. The mind flayer particles were present in this biomass, giving it animation and purpose. The pool of melted human bodies began to take shape, forming into something solid and terrible. What emerged from the biomass was a physical body for the mind flayer. The entity shaped the melted flesh into a spider-like creature, matching the form it held in the Upside Down. But this version was made entirely from human bodies that had been melted and reformed. The creature was massive, towering over buildings. It had long legs made from bones and flesh stretched and twisted into new configurations. Its body was a grotesque mass of biological material held together by the mind flayer's will. This proxy body was the mind flayer's way of acting directly in the human world. It was no longer just particles or possessing people. It now had a physical form that could hunt and kill. The mind flayer's proxy body began hunting for 11. The entity had a specific goal beyond just spreading and consuming. It wanted to eliminate 11 because she was the greatest threat to its plans. 11 had closed the first gate and stopped the previous invasion. The mind flayer knew through the hive mind connection to Vecna that 11 needed to be neutralized if the invasion was going to succeed. The creature tracked 11 through the hive mind connection it had to Billy, who knew where 11 was staying. The mind flayer attacked 11 at Hopper's cabin in the woods.
The massive creature crashed through the cabin, destroying walls and furniture as it pursued 11 and her friends. The group tried to fight back, but their weapons were useless against the creature's size and power. They ran from the cabin and escaped in a car, but the Mind Flayer followed them. The chase continued through the woods, with the creature pursuing them relentlessly. The Mind Flayer caught up to the car and attacked it, flipping the vehicle over. 11 and her friends were trapped. During this attack, the Mind Flayer got close enough to 11 to strike directly. One of the creature's limbs or tendrils shot out and grabbed 11's leg. The appendage had a mouth-like opening filled with teeth. This mouth clamped down on 11's leg and bit her. The bite was deep and painful. 11 screamed from the injury. The Mind Flayer released her, and the group managed to escape to a nearby store, but 11 was badly hurt. Her leg was wounded and bleeding from the bite. Something worse than the physical injury had happened during the bite. A piece of the Mind Flayer had broken off and lodged itself in 11's leg. This fragment was alive, moving under her skin. 11 could feel it crawling inside the wound. The pain was intense, and the sensation was horrible. Her friends tried to help her, but they did not know what to do about the piece of the Mind Flayer that was stuck inside her. Jonathan tried to cut it out but could not reach it. The fragment was too deep and moving too much. Finally, 11 used her own powers to extract the piece from her leg. She focused her telekinesis on the fragment and pulled it out through the wound. It emerged as a small, writhing piece of the creature, which 11 threw away. After the Mind Flayer fragment was removed from her leg, something terrible happened to 11. Her powers stopped working. 11 tried to use her telekinesis to move objects, but nothing happened. She tried to access her abilities, but they would not respond. The powers that had defined 11's entire life were suddenly gone. She could not move things with her mind. She could not fight the Mind Flayer with her abilities. 11 was powerless, just a normal person without anything special to help her friends. The connection between the Mind Flayer's bite and the loss of 11's powers was clear from the timing. 11 had her powers before the bite. After the bite and the removal of the fragment, her powers were gone. Whether the Mind Flayer had deliberately drained her powers through the bite, or whether the trauma of the attack had somehow blocked her abilities, was not fully explained, but the result was the same. 11 was no longer able to use her psychic powers. This was exactly what the Mind Flayer needed to accomplish. With 11 powerless,
The entity could continue its invasion without her interference. The loss of 11's powers was significant for what we now understand about Vecna's ultimate plan. 11 was the one person who had ever defeated Henry Creel. She had banished him to the Upside Down, and she had closed the gates that allowed the Mind Flayer to invade Earth. Vecna, acting through the Mind Flayer, needed to neutralize 11 if he was going to succeed in his mission. The bite may have been an attempt to absorb or drain some of 11's abilities. Through the Mind Flayer, Vecna could have taken part of what made 11 special. This would explain how Vecna later gained the ability to reach across dimensions and open gates through his curse killings in Season 4, an ability he did not have before. While 11 was dealing with the loss of her powers, the battle against the Mind Flayer continued. The proxy body kept hunting for the group, trying to kill them all. Billy, still possessed by the Mind Flayer, brought 11 and her friends to Starcourt Mall, where the final confrontation would take place. Meanwhile, Hopper and Joyce had discovered the Soviet facility beneath the mall. They learned that the Soviets were keeping a gate open to the Upside Down. Hopper and Joyce fought their way through the Soviet base to reach the machine that was maintaining the gate. The climactic battle happened in the mall. The Mind Flayer's proxy body smashed into the building, pursuing 11 and the others. 11 could not fight back with powers anymore, so she was vulnerable. Billy, possessed by the Mind Flayer, grabbed 11 and held her while the proxy creature approached to kill her. But something happened in Billy during this moment. His real consciousness fought back against the Mind Flayer's control. 11 had spoken to Billy, reaching the part of him that was still human. Billy remembered who he was and what he cared about. In a final act of redemption, Billy turned against the Mind Flayer. He stood between the creature and 11, protecting her. The Mind Flayer's proxy body attacked Billy, killing him. But Billy's sacrifice gave 11 time to survive. At the same moment, beneath the mall, Joyce reached the Soviet machine. Hopper had been fighting Soviet soldiers and could not reach Joyce in time. Joyce faced the machine alone. She knew that destroying the machine would close the gate and stop the Mind Flayer, but it would also kill Hopper, who was still on the platform near the machine. The situation was desperate. The Mind Flayer was seconds away from killing 11 and her friends upstairs. Joyce made the terrible choice. She destroyed the machine. The machine exploded, and the gate it was maintaining immediately closed. The connection between Earth and the Upside Down was severed once again. The effects rippled through everything connected to the Mind Flayer. Upstairs in the mall, the proxy creature began to collapse. The biomass that made up its body lost cohesion as the hive mind connection was cut off. The creature fell apart, dissolving back into dead flesh. The black particles of the Mind Flayer scattered and fell dormant. The invasion was stopped. But the Mind Flayer particles did not die. Just like when the first gate closed, the particles became dormant rather than destroyed. They scattered and fell to the ground, waiting for another chance to reconnect to the Upside Down. The Mind Flayer still existed in its home dimension, still connected to Vecna's will and consciousness. Closing the gate had stopped the immediate invasion, but had not eliminated the threat. Vecna remained in the Upside Down, planning and preparing for his next attempt to destroy humanity. The events of Season 3 showed that Vecna, working through the Mind Flayer, was adapting his strategies. He had learned from the failures of the previous invasions. He had possessed a human to gather more victims. He had built a physical body in the real world.
He had specifically targeted and apparently weakened 11, the greatest obstacle to his plans. Each invasion attempt taught Vecna more about how to attack Earth effectively. The closure of the second gate was another setback, but Vecna was patient. He would find another way. His ultimate plan to merge the Upside Down with Earth and destroy human civilization was still in motion. The next phase of his plan would be even more direct and deadly than what had come before.
Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we have Vecna's Curse, The Four Gates, and Season 4's Ritual Murders, March 1986. By March 1986, almost 9 months had passed since the gate beneath Starcourt Mall was closed. Hawkins was trying to recover from the fire at the mall that had killed dozens of people, including Billy Hargrove. 11 had moved away from Hawkins with the Byers family to California. She was living a new life, far from the town where so much had happened. Her powers had not returned since the Mind Flayer bit her in July 1985. 11 was now just a normal teenager without abilities. Back in Hawkins, the remaining kids were starting high school and trying to move forward with their lives. But Vecna was preparing to make his most direct attack yet on the town and its residents. Vecna had been in the Upside Down since September 1979, when 11 banished him there. He had spent years ruling that dimension, shaping the Mind Flayer, and attempting to invade Earth through various methods. His previous attempts had been stopped when the gates connecting the dimensions were closed. But now, Vecna had developed a new ability. He could reach across dimensions without needing an open gate. He could project his consciousness into the human world and connect with people psychically. This was something Vecna had not been able to do in the earlier seasons.
Something had changed that gave him this new power to bridge dimensions with his mind.
The timing of this new ability is significant. Vecna did not demonstrate the power to reach across dimensions and affect people until after the events of Season 3. After the Mind Flayer bit 11 and her powers disappeared, Vecna suddenly could do something he had never done before. Whether Vecna absorbed part of 11's abilities through that bite, or whether he learned something from the connection, the result was that Vecna now possessed powers that allowed him to act directly from the Upside Down without needing a physical gate to be opened first. Vecna began using his new ability to target specific people in Hawkins. He was not choosing victims randomly. Vecna was selecting teenagers who were suffering from severe trauma, guilt, or psychological pain. These young people were vulnerable because of their emotional and mental states. Vecna could sense their suffering and use it as an entry point to connect with them. Once Vecna established a psychic connection with a victim, he could trap them in visions and ultimately kill them. This killing process became known as Vecna's Curse. The first victim was Chrissy Cunningham. Chrissy was a popular cheerleader at Hawkins High School, but she was suffering in ways that most people did not see. She had an eating disorder and was dealing with emotional abuse from her mother. Chrissy was experiencing disturbing visions that terrified her. She saw her mother in horrible ways and heard voices taunting her. These visions were being sent by Vecna, who had connected to Chrissy through her trauma. Chrissy went to Eddie Munson to buy drugs, hoping they would help her stop seeing things. But while she was at Eddie's trailer, Vecna's curse completed. Chrissy suddenly froze in place, her eyes rolling back in her head. She was trapped in a vision, unable to move or respond to anything in the real world. Eddie tried to help her but could not reach her. In the vision, Chrissy was trapped with Vecna in a distorted version of her memories. Vecna spoke to her about her trauma and her pain. Then, Vecna killed her. Chrissy's body lifted into the air in Eddie's trailer. Her bones began breaking one by one. Her jaw shattered, and her limbs twisted at wrong angles. Her eyes were pushed back into her skull. Chrissy died in the same way that Vecna had killed his mother and sister in 1959, and the same way the numbered children had died at Hawkins Laboratory in 1979. Her body fell to the floor, broken and lifeless. When Chrissy died, something extraordinary happened at the location of her death. The energy of her death, channeled through Vecna's psychic connection, exploded outward. A gate opened in the ceiling of Eddie's trailer. The dimensional barrier tore apart, creating a portal to the Upside Down. This gate was different from the ones that had been artificially opened before. This gate was created by Vecna's power, using the victim's death as the catalyst. The gate was not large, but it was real, a new wound in reality caused by Vecna's curse. Vecna's second victim was Fred Benson. Fred was a student journalist who worked with Nancy Wheeler on the school newspaper. Fred was dealing with guilt over a car accident that had killed someone. He blamed himself for the death, even though it had been an accident. Fred began experiencing visions similar to what Chrissy had seen. He saw the victim of the accident accusing him and tormenting him. These visions were sent by Vecna, who had connected to Fred through his guilt. While Fred was at the trailer park with Nancy investigating Chrissy's death, Vecna's curse completed. Fred froze and was trapped in a vision. His body lifted into the air and his bones broke in the same terrible way. Fred died, and another gate opened at the location of his death. The third victim was Patrick McKinney. Patrick was a basketball player at Hawkins High School. He appeared confident on the outside, but was suffering from abuse at home. Patrick's father was violent toward him, and Patrick carried trauma from years of this treatment. Vecna connected to Patrick through this trauma and began sending him visions. Patrick was at Lover's Lake with the basketball team when Vecna's curse completed. Patrick was standing in the water when he froze. His body lifted out of the lake and floated in the air. His bones broke and his eyes were destroyed. Patrick died, and a third gate opened in the lake where he had been standing. Each of these deaths created a gate at the exact location where the victim died. The gates were not random. They formed a pattern across Hawkins, connecting to each other in a specific geometric arrangement. Dustin and the others realized that Vecna was creating these gates deliberately. The pattern suggested that Vecna needed 4 gates total. 4 deaths would complete some kind of ritual or process that would allow Vecna to accomplish something much bigger than just killing individuals. Vecna's fourth target was Max Mayfield. Max was dealing with severe guilt and trauma over Billy's death. She blamed herself for what happened to her stepbrother. Max had wished Billy would die when he was abusing her and their family. Then Billy actually died while possessed by the Mind Flayer, sacrificing himself to save Eleven. Max felt responsible and was consumed by guilt. She isolated herself from her friends and was suffering from depression. This made her exactly the kind of victim Vecna was looking for. Vecna connected to Max and began showing her visions of Billy and the guilt she felt. The group discovered that music could help break Vecna's curse. When Max was trapped in her first vision, her friends played her favorite song through headphones. The music gave Max something to hold on to emotionally.
It created a lifeline back to reality that allowed her to escape from Vecna's mental trap. Max survives that first encounter with Vecna, but she knew he would come for her again. The curse was not broken, only delayed. Vecna wanted Max as his fourth victim to complete the ritual. While Max was dealing with Vecna's targeting, other members of the group were investigating Vecna's identity. Nancy, Steve, Robin, and Eddie went into the Upside Down through the gate at Eddie's trailer. They discovered that Vecna was living in the Upside Down version of the Creel house. Nancy was captured by Vecna during this investigation. Vecna trapped Nancy in a vision and spoke to her directly. He revealed his true identity as Henry Creel. Vecna explained his entire history to Nancy, from his childhood in the Creel house to his time as number 1 at Hawkins Laboratory to his banishment by Eleven. Vecna showed Nancy visions of the future, a vision of Hawkins being torn apart by massive rifts. He told Nancy about his plan to destroy humanity and reshape the world. The group formed a plan to stop Vecna. They would use Max as bait. Max would allow Vecna to begin his curse on her, which would draw Vecna's attention and consciousness into the vision. While Vecna was focused on Max, Nancy, Steve, and Robin would attack Vecna's physical body at the Creel house in the Upside Down. The theory was that if they could kill or severely injure Vecna's body while he was distracted, they could stop him from completing the fourth kill and prevent the gates from merging. The plan was executed in March 1986. Max went to the Creel house in the real world
and allowed herself to enter a trance, opening herself to Vecna's curse. Vecna took the bait and trapped Max in a vision. In the vision, Max was in Vecna's mindscape, a twisted version of the Creel house. Vecna appeared before her and prepared to kill her the same way he had killed the others. Meanwhile, Nancy, Steve, and Robin reached Vecna's physical body at the upside-down version of the Creel house. They found him in the attic, suspended by vines and connected to the dimension. Vecna's body was there, even though his consciousness was in the vision with Max. Nancy, Steve, and Robin attacked. They shot Vecna multiple times with guns and threw Molotov cocktails at him. Vecna's body caught fire and burned. He screamed in pain as the flames consumed him. The attack seemed successful. Vecna's body fell from where it had been suspended and crashed through the floor of the house. He fell to the ground floor, badly burned and wounded. The group thought they had killed him, but at the same time, in Max's mind, Vecna was still completing his curse. 11 had been working to regain her powers at a special facility far from Hawkins. She had been reliving her memories and trying to reconnect with her abilities. By focusing on who she was and what she cared about, 11 managed to access her powers again. She used these restored powers to project herself into Max's mind. 11 appeared in the vision and confronted Vecna directly. She fought him, trying to save Max from being killed. The battle between 11 and Vecna happened on 2 levels. Vecna's physical body was being attacked by Nancy, Steve, and Robin in the Upside Down. At the same time, Vecna's consciousness was fighting 11 in Max's mind. Vecna was strong enough to maintain both battles simultaneously. In Max's mind, Vecna bound both 11 and Max with vines in his mindscape. He was preparing to kill Max even while his body was burning. Vecna explained to 11 that she had created him when she banished him to the Upside Down. He claimed that none of this would have happened if 11 had not sent him there. Back in the real world at the Creel house, Lucas was with Max trying to protect her physical body while she was trapped in the vision. Jason Carver, a basketball player who blamed Eddie for the murders, had found them at the Creel house. Jason believed Lucas was involved in some kind of satanic ritual. He attacked Lucas, and they fought while Max was helpless in her trance. Jason's interference disrupted the plan and put Max in even more danger. In the Upside Down, Vecna's burned body suddenly vanished from where it had fallen. He had used his powers to escape from Nancy, Steve, and Robin. Vecna was severely wounded, but still alive and active. In Max's mind, Vecna prepared to kill her. He began the process, and Max's body in the real world lifted into the air. Her bones started breaking. Her eyes went white as they were being destroyed from the inside. Max was dying from Vecna's curse, just like the others had died. But Max did not fully die. Lucas and 11 both intervened in different ways. Lucas held Max's body and spoke to her, trying to reach her. 11 fought Vecna in the mindscape, attacking him with her powers and trying to free Max. The combination of efforts managed to pull Max back from death at the last moment. Max's heart stopped, but 11 used her powers to restart it. Max survived, but she was left in a coma, her mind and body severely damaged from Vecna's attack. Her eyes had been destroyed and she was unconscious, barely alive. Even though Max technically survived, Vecna had accomplished what he needed. The moment of Max's death, even though it was reversed, was enough. The psychic energy of that death exploded outward, just like the others had. A 4th gate opened at the Creel house where Max's body had been. This 4th gate completed Vecna's ritual. The 4 gates across Hawkins suddenly activated simultaneously. They began spreading and growing, tearing through the town like massive scars. The gates connected to each other, creating enormous rifts that ran through streets and buildings. The rifts spread rapidly through Hawkins. Buildings were split in half by the tears in reality. The ground cracked open, and red energy glowed from the fissures. The Upside Down began bleeding through into the real world. The dimensional barrier was collapsing. Vecna had succeeded in creating a permanent merge between Hawkins and the Upside Down. The 2 dimensions were joining together, with the dark vines and decay of the Upside Down spreading into the real Hawkins. The town was being consumed. Vecna had been wounded by the attacks from Nancy, Steve, Robin, and 11. His body was burned and damaged, but he had survived, and he had completed his plan. The 4 gates were open and growing. Hawkins was being merged with the Upside Down. This was what Vecna had been working toward for years. All his previous attempts had been stopped by closing the gates, but these new gates could not be closed easily because they were created by Vecna's own power, rather than by machines or accidental psychic contact. Vecna had found a way to permanently breach the barrier between dimensions. The vision Vecna had shown Nancy came true. Hawkins was torn apart by the rifts, exactly as he had predicted. Vecna's ultimate plan was unfolding. He wanted to merge the Upside Down with Earth completely, spreading his hive mind across the human world and destroying civilization. The events of Season 4 brought him closer to this goal than he had ever been before. Vecna had been wounded, but not defeated. He retreated into the Upside Down to recover and prepare for the final stage of his plan. The battle was not over. It was just beginning. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on to the 12 Vessels. Season 5's endgame to reshape the world. Fall 1987. By the fall of 1987, approximately 20 months had passed since the massive rifts tore through Hawkins at the end of Season 4. The town was scarred by these rifts, with huge cracks running through streets and buildings. The Upside Down had merged with parts of Hawkins, creating zones where the dark dimension bled into the real world. The government had placed Hawkins under military quarantine, with soldiers controlling access to the town and monitoring the situation. Life in Hawkins had become strange and difficult, with residents living under constant military presence and the threat of the Upside Down always nearby. During these 20 months, Vecna had been completely silent. There was no monster activity from the Upside Down. The Demogorgons and other creatures that should have been attacking through the open rifts were not appearing. 11 tried repeatedly to use her powers to locate Vecna psychically, but she could not sense him anywhere. It was as if Vecna had vanished completely. This silence created an uneasy calm in Hawkins. People hoped that maybe Vecna had died from his injuries in Season 4 when Nancy, Steve, and Robin attacked him. But those who knew Vecna understood that he was more likely recovering and planning his next move. Jim Hopper, who had survived the explosion at the Soviet facility and eventually returned to Hawkins, took charge of efforts to find Vecna. Hopper organized dangerous reconnaissance missions into the Upside Down called crawls. Teams would enter the dimension through the rifts and search for any sign of Vecna's whereabouts. These crawls were risky because the Upside Down was hostile and unpredictable, but Hopper kept sending teams in, desperately trying to locate their enemy before he could make his next move. All of these missions failed to find anything. Vecna was nowhere to be found in the Upside Down. The reason Vecna could not be found was discovered during these crawls into the Upside Down. A massive wall had formed in the dimension. This wall was circular, surrounding the Upside Down version of Hawkins completely. The wall seemed to be made of organic material similar to the vines and growth that covered everything in the Upside Down.
What made this wall particularly strange was that it regenerated. If someone tried to break through the wall or damage it, the wall would repair itself. The barrier was impenetrable and self-healing, creating a perfect circle around Hawkins in the Upside Down. Inside this circular wall, Vecna was hiding. The wall blocked Eleven's psychic abilities from sensing him and prevented Hopper's teams from reaching him. Vecna had spent the 20 months since March 1986 healing from his wounds. He had been severely burned and injured when Nancy, Steve, and Robin attacked his body at the Creel house. Vecna needed time to recover from this damage. While he healed, he also planned his next and most ambitious attack. Vecna had learned from all his previous failures. He had tried sending the Demogorgon, possessing will through the Mind Flayer, building a flesh body, and using his curse to kill teenagers. Each attempt had been stopped or only partially successful. Now Vecna was ready to try a different approach, one that would finally allow him to complete his mission to destroy humanity and reshape the world. Vecna's new plan involved kidnapping children from Hawkins. Not just any children, but 12 children specifically. Vecna had chosen the number 12 deliberately for reasons connected to his ultimate goal. He explained his reasoning when he finally revealed himself. Vecna believed that children were perfect vessels for his purposes. Their young minds were not fully formed and were therefore weak. Children could be broken more easily than adults. They could be reshaped and controlled. Their bodies and consciousnesses could be invaded and manipulated. Vecna had learned this from Will Byers years earlier. When Vecna took Will to the Upside Down in 1983 and infected him with the feeding tube, Will had survived. Will had proven that a child could endure exposure to the Upside Down, could be connected to the hive mind, and could be used as a vessel. Will's survival and the way he responded to possession showed Vecna that children were the key to his plans. Vecna stated directly that Will had been the inspiration for his entire strategy with the 12 children. Will had been the first, and his experience had shown Vecna what was possible. Now Vecna wanted to replicate that process with 12 children, creating vessels he could use to accomplish his goal of reshaping the world. Vecna began his kidnapping plan by taking one child at a time.
The first victim was Holly Wheeler, the young daughter of Mike and Nancy's parents. Holly was only a small child, much younger than the teenagers Vecna had targeted with his curse in Season 4. Vecna used a different approach to capture Holly. He did not kill her with his curse. Instead, he deceived her. Vecna appeared to Holly as an imaginary friend. He took the form of a kind, friendly presence that Holly could trust. Vecna called himself Mr. Whatsit when he appeared to Holly. A demogorgon came through the roof of Holly's bedroom one night, breaking into the Wheeler house violently. Holly's parents, Karen and Ted Wheeler, tried to stop the creature. They fought desperately to protect their daughter, but they could not stop a demogorgon. The creature was too strong and too fast. The demogorgon grabbed Holly and dragged her through a portal into the Upside Down. Once Holly was in the Upside Down, Vecna's deception began in earnest. Holly found herself walking toward a house that looked beautiful and normal, nothing like the dark decay of the Upside Down. Her imaginary friend Mr. Whatsit was with her, guiding her and making her feel safe. When Mr. Whatsit's face was finally revealed, it was Vecna. The monster had been pretending to be a friend to gain Holly's trust. He led Holly to the Creel house, but through Vecna's power, the house appeared to Holly as a nice, welcoming place rather than the nightmare location it truly was.
Vecna told Holly that her classmate Derek would be joining them soon. He explained that more children from Hawkins would follow. Vecna was beginning his collection of the 12 vessels. Over the next nights, Vecna continued his kidnapping plan. He took one child the first night after Holly, 3 children the next night, and 8 children the night after that. The pattern added up to 12 total if you included Holly. Vecna was systematically abducting the children of Hawkins, pulling them into the Upside Down where he could keep them. The Demogorgons acted as Vecna's agents in these kidnappings, breaking into homes and taking children while their families tried helplessly to stop them. The military quarantine in Hawkins tried to protect the children by gathering them in safe locations, but even this could not fully stop Vecna's attacks. The situation reached a crisis point when the military gathered many children at a location called the Mac Z, trying to keep them safe in one fortified area. But Vecna attacked this location directly. He emerged through the gate in a dramatic and terrifying entrance. Vecna's appearance had changed since Season 4. His body looked different, thinner and spinier, with more pronounced features. He had healed from his burns, but the injuries had transformed him further. Vecna walked through the gate and into the real world, surveying the scene before him. His presence was overwhelming and frightening. Then, Vecna commanded his Demogorgons to attack and take the remaining children he needed. During this attack, Vecna confronted Will Byers directly. This was the moment when Vecna revealed his plan and his connection to Will. Vecna used his powers to lift Will into the air, holding him suspended while he spoke. Vecna explained that he was taking these children because their minds were weak and their bodies were vulnerable. Children could be broken and reshaped for Vecna's purposes. Vecna told Will that Will himself had been the first, that Will's survival in 1983 had shown Vecna what could be achieved. Vecna claimed that Will had inspired this entire plan. If Will had not survived, Vecna might never have realized that children could serve as vessels. But something unexpected happened during this confrontation. Will fought back in a way no one anticipated. Will had been connected to the Upside Down and to Vecna through the hive mind since 1983. This connection had never fully gone away, even after the mind flare was driven from his body. The link was still there, dormant but present. When Vecna attacked and lifted Will into the air, Will felt the hive mind connection activate strongly. In that moment of crisis, Will realized he could access the hive mind himself. He could tap into the same network that connected all of Vecna's creatures. Will focused on his memories of happiness and love. He remembered building Castle Byers with his brother Jonathan. He remembered meeting Mike Wheeler for the first time and being asked if he wanted to be friends. He remembered drawing pictures with crayons and showing them to his mother Joyce. These memories gave Will strength, just as memories had helped him fight the mind flayer before. But now Will used that strength to do something new. He tapped into the hive mind and accessed its power. Will could suddenly sense the Demogorgons around him. He could see through their eyes. He could feel their presence in the hive mind network. Then Will did something remarkable. He took control of the Demogorgons. Using the hive mind connection, Will manipulated the creatures the same way Vecna would. Will raised his hand, and the Demogorgons froze in place. They stopped attacking. Will focused his will on the creatures and began killing them. The Demogorgons' limbs snapped and broke. Their bodies were destroyed by the power Will channeled through the hive mind.
Will was using Vecna's own network against him, turning the hive mind into a weapon to protect his friends and family. Blood ran from Will's nose from the effort, the same nosebleed effect that 11 always showed when using her powers. Will had powers now, though they were different from 11's abilities. The Duffer brothers explained that Will's powers work differently from 11's psychic abilities. Will cannot use telekinesis on just anything. He can only manipulate things that are part of the hive mind. He is tapping into Vecna's conference to the upside-down creatures and using it himself. Will described it as being able to see through the creatures' eyes and control what they do. But this power only works when Will is close to the hive mind. It is proximity-based. If Will is far from the upside down and its connection, he cannot access these abilities. The power comes from Vecna's network, not from within Will himself. Will is essentially puppeteering Vecna's own creatures by hijacking the hive mind connection. Despite Will's intervention and the resistance from the heroes, Vecna succeeded in taking the children he needed. The Demogorgons grabbed children during the chaos at the Max Z and pulled them into the upside down. Vecna now had 12 children total, the exact number he required for his plan. Will realized through his connection to the hive mind that Vecna had 12 specific places prepared for these vessels. He had seen a vision of Vecna's lair with spaces for each child. Vecna's collection was complete. What Vecna intended to do with these 12 children remained unclear at the end of Volume 1. Vecna stated that he wanted to reshape the world. He claimed this was his ultimate goal, the purpose behind everything he had done since he was banished to the Upside Down. But what reshaping the world specifically meant was not fully explained. The heroes and the audience were left to piece together what Vecna's endgame might be. The mysterious wall circling the Upside Down, the 12 children as vessels, and Vecna's stated goal of reshaping the world were all pieces of a larger plan that had not yet been fully revealed. What was clear was that Vecna believed breaking the dimensional barriers completely was part of his goal. He had already succeeded in creating permanent rifts that merged parts of Hawkins with the Upside Down. Now, with 12 children as vessels, Vecna apparently believed he could go further. He could break down the barriers entirely and accomplish his vision of destroying human civilization and creating something new in its place. The 12 children were somehow the key to this final stage of his plan. 11 and Hopper, meanwhile, had been searching for Vecna inside the Upside Down. They went to a military base that had been established in the dimension, hoping to find Vecna there. Instead, they discovered something unexpected. Kali, also known as 8, was being held at the base. Kali was one of the numbered children from Hawkins' laboratory, the girl with illusion powers whom 11 had met briefly in Season 2. Kali was alive and had been captured by the military for unknown purposes. Her presence raised questions about what the military had been doing in the Upside Down and why they had imprisoned one of Dr. Brenner's former test subjects. But it also meant that 11 now had an ally with powers, someone who could help in the fight against Vecna. The situation at the end of Volume 1 was desperate. Vecna had 12 children and was preparing to complete his plan. Will had discovered powers that could fight back against the hive mind, giving the heroes a new weapon. 11 had her powers back and had found Kali. The military was involved in ways that were not fully understood. The wall around the upside-down version of Hawkins kept Vecna hidden and protected. The dimensional barriers were already damaged by the rifts. Everything was building toward a final confrontation between Vecna and the heroes of Hawkins.
Vecna's ultimate plan, which had begun when he murdered his family in 1959 and continued through his transformation into a monster and his years ruling the Upside Down, was reaching its conclusion. Every attack, every invasion attempt, every death had been part of this larger goal to reshape the world by destroying the barriers between dimensions and eliminating humanity. The 12 vessels were the final piece Vecna needed. What would happen when Vecna used these children for his ritual would determine the fate not just of Hawkins, but of the entire world. The battle that began on September 8, 1979, when 11 banished Henry Creel to another dimension, was finally approaching its end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.